Boston was drowning in snow the night Serafina Vale pulled a dying crime lord from the gutter. 16 bullets in his chest, gray eyes burning with the kind of violence that built empires. She should have run. Instead, she dragged him home and spent the entire night digging metal from his body with trembling hands. When his heart stopped, she brought him back. What she didn't know, the man bleeding in her arms was Lucien Moretti, the ghost monarch himself, Boston's most feared syndicate king, and saving his life had just made her the most dangerous piece on a chessboard soaked in blood. If you want to see where this story goes, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this tale travels. The free clinic smelled like industrial cleaner and broken promises. Serafina Vale had been on her feet for 16 hours straight, stitching wounds that wouldn't stay closed, treating pneumonia with supplies meant for headaches, watching people die in hallways because there weren't enough beds. Her nurse scrubs stuck to her skin beneath a wool coat that had seen better winters, exhaustion clinging to her bones like frost. Outside, Boston was being buried alive. The blizzard had started at noon and hadn't stopped. By midnight, the harbor district looked like the end of the world. Streetlights flickering through sheets of ice, cars abandoned in drifts taller than men, alleyways swallowed whole by winter darkness. The few people still moving through the storm walked hunched and fast, heads down, survival mode. Serafina locked the clinic door behind her and stepped into the cold. The wind hit her like a fist. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking, boots crunching through virgin snow, breath fogging in front of her face. Her apartment was 6 blocks away. Might as well have been 60. The city had stopped running buses hours ago. Even the drug dealers had gone home. She was halfway down Wharf Street when she heard it. A groan. Weak. Ragged. Human. Serafina stopped. The wind screamed past her ears, drowning out everything except instinct. She turned slowly, scanning the frozen landscape, and that's when she saw the blood. Dark red. Almost black against the snow. A trail leading behind a snowbank near the loading docks. Every rational part of her brain screamed to keep walking. This was the harbor district. People got shot here. People got dumped here. People who stopped to help usually joined them. But Serafina had spent her entire adult life ignoring the smart choice. She followed the blood. Behind the snowbank, half buried in ice and shadow, lay a man in a shredded black suit. His chest looked like something had tried to tear him apart from the inside out. Bullet wounds across his ribs, his shoulder, his abdomen, each one catastrophic. Blood pooled beneath him in the white pavement like the city itself had stabbed him open. His eyes were still open. Gray, cold, aware. "Don't," he rasped, voice barely a whisper. "Don't call the police." Serafina knelt beside him, her medical training kicking in before fear could catch up. She pressed shaking fingers against his throat, checking for a pulse. Thready, weak, fading. "You've been shot," she said, which was the dumbest thing she'd said all year. "You need a hospital." "No hospital." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with shocking strength for someone halfway to dead. "No police. No hospital." "Then you're going to die here." Better than the alternative. She stared at him. At the suit that probably cost more than her rent, at the tattoos crawling up his neck beneath the blood, at the way his eyes tracked her movements like a predator even now, bleeding out in a snowbank. This man wasn't a victim. He was something else entirely. "I can't move you alone," Serafina said. "You weigh too much and I'm barely standing." "Then leave me." "Shut up." She stood, looked around the empty street, then made a decision that would ruin her entire life. "My place is 2 blocks away," she said. "If you can walk, I can get you there. But if you die on me, I'm dragging your corpse to the police station myself." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. Deal. Getting him to his feet took 5 minutes and felt like lifting a corpse. He was heavy, solid muscle beneath the ruined suit, and every step left a trail of blood dark enough to see even in the blizzard. Serafina wrapped his arm around her shoulders and half dragged him through the storm, her boots slipping on ice, her lungs burning from the cold. He didn't make a sound, not when she accidentally jarred his wounds, not when they fell together in a snowdrift and she had to haul him back up, not when they finally reached the basement apartment beneath the laundromat, and she shoved him through the door into warmth that felt like violence after the frozen streets. The apartment was tiny. One room, cracked pipes rattling in the walls, a mattress on the floor, an ancient radio hissing jazz through static. The kind of place people ended up when the world had finished kicking them. Serafina locked the door and turned to find the stranger collapsed against the wall, breathing shallow, skin pale as paper. She'd saved lives before, but never like this. Never alone, in a basement apartment with rusted surgical tools and boiled water and sheer desperate hope. "What's your name?" she asked, dragging him toward the mattress. "Does it matter?" "I'd like to know who I'm about to watch die." He looked at her with those gray eyes, and for the first time, something human flickered behind the ice. "Lucien." "Serafina." She grabbed scissors and started cutting away his shirt. "Try not to bleed on my floor more than necessary." Beneath the fabric, his chest was a battlefield. 16 wounds. She counted them twice. 16 bullets had torn through this man, and he was still breathing, still conscious, still looking at her like he was calculating whether she was a threat. Serafina boiled water on the stove, pulled out the medical kit she kept for emergencies, and laid out everything she had: forceps, gauze, antiseptic, trembling hands. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Everything hurts." She started digging. The first bullet came out easy, lodged shallow in his shoulder. The second fought her, buried deep near his collarbone. The third made him flinch for the first time, a sharp intake of breath that told her she'd hit bone. By the fifth, her hands were shaking so badly she had to stop. "Keep going," Lucien said through gritted teeth. "I'm a nurse, not a surgeon." "You're all I have." Something about the way he said it, flat, resigned, true, made her keep moving. Hours blurred together, bullets hitting the metal bowl with hollow clangs, blood soaking through gauze faster than she could replace it, jazz hissing through the radio like a ghost whispering secrets. Lucien never screamed, never begged. But somewhere around the 10th bullet, he started talking. "There's a girl," he said, voice distant. "Vivian, 6 years old. If I don't make it, you're making it. If I don't, someone needs to tell her I tried." Serafina's hands stilled. She looked down at this stranger bleeding out on her mattress, this man who'd refused hospitals and police, this monster who apparently had a 6-year-old daughter waiting somewhere in the dark. "Tell her yourself," she said quietly. Then she kept digging. The 16th bullet was the deepest, buried near his heart, tangled in muscle and tissue, refusing to let go. Serafina worked for 20 minutes, sweat dripping down her face, her entire body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. When it finally came free and hit the bowl with a final metallic clang, she sat back gasping. Lucien's eyes were closed. His chest had stopped moving. "No." The word came out raw. "No, you don't get to die. Not after all that. Not—" She pressed her hands against his chest and started compressions. 1, 2, 3. "Come on. 10, 11, 12. "Breathe, you stubborn bastard." 20, 21, 22. Tears streaked down her face, her arms burned, her vision blurred. 30 compressions. Then she felt it, a shudder beneath her palms, a breath, small, fragile, impossible. Lucien's chest rose, his eyes opened, gray eyes finding hers through the haze of pain and exhaustion, and something that looked almost like surprise. "Welcome back," Serafina whispered. Then she collapsed beside him and didn't move for 3 hours. Us. When she woke, gray dawn light filtered through the basement window. The radio had died sometime during the night. Lucien was still breathing. Serafina sat up slowly, every muscle screaming, and checked his pulse. Stronger now. Steady. The bandages she'd wrapped around his chest were holding. The bleeding had stopped. Against every law of medicine and probability, he was going to survive. She made tea with shaking hands and sat watching him sleep, trying to process what she'd done. Whoever Lucien was, whatever he'd done to earn 16 bullets, he was in her apartment now. Her responsibility. Her problem. The snow had stopped outside. Boston looked clean and quiet and deceptive beneath fresh powder. Serafina sipped her tea and wondered what kind of monster she'd brought home. Chambaset. 3 days passed. Lucien didn't wake. Serafina went to work at the clinic, came home exhausted, changed his bandages, checked his vitals, and fell asleep beside him on the floor. She should have been terrified. should have called someone, should have done 1,000 smarter things. Instead, she read to him old paperback novels she'd picked up at thrift stores, stories about cowboys and detectives and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Her voice filled the small apartment while jazz played softly in the background, and sometimes, she could have sworn, his breathing changed when she read the good parts. On the fourth night, she was halfway through a chapter when his eyes opened. Serafina stopped reading. They stared at each other in the lamplight. "You're still here," Lucien said. His voice was stronger now, clearer. "Where else would I be? Smart people run from men like me." "Then I guess I'm not that smart." She set the book down. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot 16 times. "Accurate." She moved closer, checking his forehead for fever. "You should be dead." "I know." "Most people would say thank you." Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't read. "Thank you." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like he'd never said them before and didn't quite know how they worked. Serafina sat back. "Who are you, Lucien?" "Someone you should have left in the snow." "Too late for that." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her tired eyes, her worn scrubs, the tiny apartment that barely kept the cold out. "You live here alone?" "That's not an answer." "Neither is yours." "Fair point." "Yes," she said. "I live alone. I work at the free clinic 6 days a week. I don't have family in Boston. I don't have much of anything except medical debt and a mattress on the floor." She met his gaze steadily. "Your turn." Lucien was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I run things people don't talk about in daylight. I've done things that would make you call the police if you knew. The men who shot me wanted my empire. They'll try again when they find out I survived." "Are you a criminal?" "Yes." The honesty was almost worse than a lie. Serafina should have thrown him out, should have screamed, should have done anything except nod slowly and say, "Okay." "Okay," Lucien repeated. "I pulled 16 bullets out of you and brought you back from the dead. I'm already an accessory or accomplice or whatever the legal term is." She stood, heading for the kitchen. "You want tea?" "I want to understand why you're helping me." "Because you were dying and I'm a nurse." She filled the kettle. "It's not complicated." "Everything about this is complicated." "Maybe." But Serafina had learned a long time ago that life didn't pause for complications. She made tea. Lucien watched her move around the tiny kitchen with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd never encountered before. "There's a phone in my jacket," he said finally. "The one you cut off me." Serafina found it in the pile of bloody clothes she'd shoved in the corner. Miraculously, it still worked. "Call the first contact," Lucy said. "Tell them Ghost is alive." "Ghost?" "They'll understand." She made the call. A man answered on the first ring. "Who is this?" "I'm calling for—" She looked at Lucien. "What do I say?" "Tell him the ghost is alive and to come alone." Serafina repeated the message. Silence. Then, "Where?" She gave the address. The line went dead. "They're coming," she said. "I know." "Should I be worried?" Lucien's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Probably." The knock came 20 minutes later. 3 sharp raps. Serafina opened the door to find 2 men in expensive coats standing in the stairwell. Behind them, barely visible in the shadows, was a little girl clutching a teddy bear. The first man, broad-shouldered, scarred, dangerous, looked past Serafina into the apartment. His expression cracked when he saw Lucien sitting up against the wall. "Boss," he breathed. The little girl pushed past the men and ran straight into the apartment, straight to Serafina. "Mommy," she whispered, wrapping small arms around Serafina's legs. The word hit the room like a gunshot. Everyone froze. The little girl looked up at Serafina with huge dark eyes, Lucien's eyes, and something in Serafina's chest shattered and reformed in the same instant. "I'm not—" she started, but the child was already crying softly into her scrubs, tiny body shaking, and Serafina found herself kneeling without thinking, wrapping the girl in her arms, whispering things that didn't mean anything except, "You're safe. You're okay. I've got you." Lucien's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Vivian. The little girl turned. Papa, she whispered. She ran to him. She ran. Lucian caught her with his good arm, pulling her close despite the pain it must have caused, his face transforming into something Serafina hadn't seen before. Love. Raw and desperate and terrifying. The scarred man stepped into the apartment. We thought you were dead. Damien's people have been moving on the territory. The whole syndicate thinks... They think wrong. Lucian's voice hardened back into steel. How bad? 3 safe houses burned, 5 of our people dead. Damien's claiming the throne. Lucian's jaw tightened. Vivian pulled back, looking up at her father with worry far too old for 6 years. You're hurt. I'm okay, princess. You're lying. Despite everything, the blood, the danger, the empire crumbling, Lucian smiled. Maybe a little. Serafina watched this exchange feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. These people didn't belong in her world. This little girl with her expensive coat and her crime lord father and her eyes that had seen too much. Miss Vale. She looked up. Lucian was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You saved my life, he said quietly. That creates a debt. I don't want... It's not about what you want. In my world, debts matter. They're currency, power, protection. He paused. And right now, you're in danger. Why? Because you know I'm alive. Because you've seen my face, my daughter, my people. Because the moment Damien finds out you exist, he'll come for you to get to me. The words settled over the room like ice. So what do I do? Serafina asked. Lucian looked at Vivian, then back at her. You come with us. Boom. The Moretti estate rose from the frozen coastline like something out of a nightmare disguised as a dream. Glass and steel and stone carved into the cliffs overlooking Boston Harbor. Security gates that could stop tanks. Windows that probably cost more than Serafina's entire life. The kind of place where empires were built and enemies disappeared. Beautiful. Lifeless. A cathedral for ghosts. Serafina stood in the marble entryway feeling like she'd been dropped into a foreign country where she didn't speak the language. Vivian held her hand. That was the only thing keeping her from running. Your rooms are upstairs, Lucian said. He was standing now, bandaged and pale, but steady. Everything you need will be provided. Don't leave the grounds without security. Don't talk to anyone outside the household. Am I a prisoner? You're under protection. Same thing. His mouth twitched. Maybe. A woman appeared, older, stern, wearing a housekeeper's uniform. I'll show you to your quarters. Vivian tugged at Serafina's hand. You'll stay, right? The hope in that small voice was unbearable. I'll stay, Serafina heard herself say. The little girl smiled. It was the first real smile Serafina had seen from her. The room they gave her could have fit her entire apartment inside it twice. King bed, silk sheets, windows overlooking the Atlantic. A bathroom with heated floors and a tub the size of a small pool. Serafina sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to cry. This wasn't her life. These weren't her people. But when she looked down at her hands, still stained with Lucian's blood despite washing them 20 times, she knew there was no going back. She'd made her choice in the snow. Everything else was just aftermath. A knock at the door made her jump. Come in. Vivian slipped inside, still clutching her teddy bear. She'd changed into pajamas, pink and soft and normal except for the sadness in her eyes. Can't sleep? Serafina asked. The girl shook her head. Want to sit with me? Vivian climbed onto the bed without hesitation, curling against Serafina's side like she'd done it 1,000 times before. They sat in silence. The ocean breathed against the cliffs. My real mommy died, Vivian said quietly. Serafina's throat tightened. I know, sweetheart. Papa says she's in heaven, but I don't think heaven is real. Why not? Because if it was, she would have come back for me. The logic was heartbreaking and perfect. Sometimes, Serafina said carefully, people can't come back even when they want to. That doesn't mean they didn't love you. Did you love someone who couldn't come back? The question hit harder than expected. Yes, Serafina admitted. My little brother, he died when I was 17. How? He got sick. The hospital couldn't save him. Vivian processed this. Is that why you save people now? Smart kid. Too smart. Maybe, Serafina said. I don't like watching people die. Papa almost died. I know. But you saved him. I tried. Vivian looked up at her with those huge dark eyes. Will you stay, even when it's scary? Serafina didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know if she could promise something when everything about this situation screamed danger. But Vivian was 6 years old and holding a teddy bear and looking at her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. So Serafina did what nurses do. She lied to make someone feel better. I'll stay, she whispered. Vivian smiled and fell asleep against her shoulder. Serafina sat there holding this child who wasn't hers, in a mansion built on blood money, protecting a crime lord who should have died in the snow. And somewhere in the dark, she heard footsteps stop outside her door, pause, then walk away. When she finally looked up, she saw Lucian's shadow disappearing down the hall. Watching. Always watching. Making sure his daughter was safe even when he could barely stand. Serafina closed her eyes and wondered what kind of monster loved this fiercely, and what it would cost her to find out. Morning came to the Moretti estate like an execution. Cold light spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Atlantic into hammered silver. Serafina woke with Vivian still curled against her side, small body warm and trusting in a way that made Serafina's chest ache. For a moment, just one breath, she let herself pretend this was normal, that she belonged here, that the previous week hadn't happened. Then Vivian stirred and the illusion shattered. You stayed, the girl whispered. I said I would. Vivian smiled, and the weight of that smile settled over Serafina like a debt she didn't know how to repay. A knock rattled the door. Miss Vale, the housekeeper's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't ask permission. Breakfast is at 7. Mr. Moretti expects you downstairs. Expects, not invites. Expect. Serafina helped Vivian get dressed, watching the little girl navigate buttons and zippers with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd learned to do everything alone, and followed her down hallways that felt more like museum corridors than a home. Marble floors. Abstract art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Security cameras tucked into corners like mechanical eyes watching everything. The dining room was worse. A table built for 20 sat mostly empty. Lucien occupied the head, dressed in black despite his injuries, looking like death wearing expensive tailoring. 3 men flanked him, the scarred one from last night, and 2 others who radiated violence the way normal people radiated warmth. They all stopped talking when Serafina entered. Sit, Lucien said. It wasn't a request. Serafina sat. Vivian climbed into the chair beside her father, small and quiet, and Serafina watched something shift in Lucian's expression, softness bleeding through the steel for just a second before the mask returned. Coffee? A server appeared at Serafina's elbow. Please? The scarred man cleared his throat. Boss, about the situation. Not now, Marcus. But, Lucien's gaze cut sideways. I said not now. Marcus shut up. The silence that followed tasted like gunpowder. Breakfast arrived. Eggs, toast, bacon, fruit arranged like it was auditioning for a magazine spread. Serafina's stomach twisted. 2 days ago, she'd been eating instant ramen in a basement apartment. Now she was sitting in a crime lord's mansion pretending this was normal. Eat, Lucian said, watching her. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten in 4 days except coffee and anxiety. Eat. How did he know that? Serafina picked up her fork and forced down a bite of eggs that tasted like ash. Vivian ate silently, eyes fixed on her plate, and Serafina recognized that look. The careful neutrality of a child who'd learned to make herself invisible when dangerous men were talking business. It made her furious. Does she always eat like this? Serafina asked, nodding toward Vivian. Lucian frowned. Like what? Like she's terrified of making noise. The table went quiet. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. The other men found their coffee extremely interesting. Lucien's jaw tightened. Vivian eats how she wants. No? Serafina leaned forward. She eats like someone taught her to be a ghost in her own house. You've been here 12 hours and you're already critiquing how I raise my daughter? I'm critiquing how you run a prison and call it a home. The words came out sharper than intended, harsher. True. Lucian stood slowly, despite the pain it clearly caused him. His men tensed. Marcus's hand drifted toward his jacket, where Serafina was absolutely certain he kept a gun. But Lucian just looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much death to be surprised by anything. Vivienne, he said quietly, go upstairs. Papa, now. The little girl slid from her chair and ran. The sound of her footsteps fading up the marble stairs felt like a countdown. When they were alone, or as alone as you could be with 3 armed men pretending not to listen, Lucien spoke. You don't know anything about my life. I know you got shot 16 times and your daughter calls strange women mommy because she's desperate for someone to act like they care. I care. Then show her. I keep her alive, Lucian said, voice dropping to something dangerous. In my world, that's love. In any world, that's the bare minimum. He moved around the table toward her and Serafina's instinct screamed to run. But she'd spent years in emergency rooms staring down angry patients and their angrier families. She knew how to hold ground even when her knees wanted to buckle. Lucien stopped inches away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the pain he was hiding, the bandages beneath his shirt slowly soaking through with blood because he was standing when he should be in bed. You think you understand, he said softly. You think you saved some tragic figure who just needs kindness. But I'm not broken, Serafina. I'm exactly what I chose to become. Then choose better. It's not that simple. It never is. They stared at each other. The dining room felt like a battlefield waiting for the first shot. Finally, Lucian stepped back. Marcus will assign you security, he said. Don't leave the estate. Don't contact anyone outside. Don't make me regret keeping you alive. Then he walked out. His men followed like shadows. Serafina sat alone at the massive table surrounded by uneaten food and the echo of her own heartbeat, wondering what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Sag. The estate had rules. Serafina learned them fast. Don't go near the East Wing where Lucien conducted business. Don't ask questions when men in expensive suits arrived at odd hours. Don't acknowledge the blood that sometimes appeared on marble floors overnight. Don't comment on the security cameras. Don't wonder about the locked rooms. Don't think too hard about what kind of empire required this much silence. She spent the first week trying to stay invisible. It didn't work. Vivienne found her everywhere. In the library where Serafina tried to read. In the kitchen where she attempted to make coffee without servants appearing like ghosts. In the garden where snow still clung to dead roses and the ocean crashed against cliffs far below. The little girl followed her like gravity. Tell me a story, Vivienne would whisper. So Serafina did. Stories about nurses who fought death with bare hands. About cities that came alive at night. About ordinary people who did extraordinary things, not because they were heroes, but because someone needed help, and they happened to be there. Vivienne listened like each word was precious. Your stories are better than the ones Papa tells, she said one afternoon while they sat in the garden watching seabirds fight the wind. What kind of stories does your father tell? Ones with monsters. Do the monsters win? Vivienne looked at her with those 2 old eyes. Always. Serafina pulled the girl closer, wrapping her coat around both of them against the cold. Not in my stories, she said. In mine, people fight back. Dieg. Lucien watched them from his office window. He told himself it was security protocol, making sure his daughter was safe. That Serafina wasn't a threat. But the truth was harder to swallow. He couldn't stop watching the way Serafina made Vivienne laugh. Real laughter. The kind that echoed through hallways built for silence. The way his daughter ran to this stranger instead of hiding. The way the mansion felt less like a mausoleum when Serafina moved through it. It terrified him. Boss! Marcus appeared in the doorway. Damien's people hit another location. The docks. 4 dead. Lucian turned from the window. Ours or theirs? Ours. He let the anger rise and then crushed it back down. Emotion was weakness. Weakness was death. He'd learned that lesson young and bloody. Tell Victor to pull everyone back to defended positions. No retaliation yet. They think you're weak, Marcus said carefully. Word is spreading that the ghost got lucky, that you're hiding instead of fighting. Let them think that. For how long? Good question. Lucien looked back out the window where Serafina was teaching Vivian to build a snowman. His daughter's laughter carried on the wind, clear and bright and absolutely foreign to this house. As long as it takes, he said. Marcus left. Lucien stayed at the window watching the only two people in his empire who weren't afraid of him, wondering when kindness had become more dangerous than bullets. 2 weeks into her stay, Serafina finally exploded. It started small. Vivian wanted pancakes for breakfast. The kitchen staff said no. Mr. Moretti's daughter ate oatmeal and fruit, doctor's orders. Whose doctor? Serafina asked. The head cook, a woman built like a tank who'd probably seen worse things than arguments over breakfast, crossed her arms. Mr. Moretti's instructions are clear. She's 6 years old and wants pancakes. Miss Vale, make the pancakes or I will. 5 minutes later, Serafina was standing at the stove in someone else's kitchen, flour on her scrubs, making pancakes from scratch while 3 staff members watched like she'd pulled a gun. Vivian sat at the counter, radiating joy. That's when Lucien walked in. He stopped, looked at Serafina covered in flour, looked at Vivian grinning, looked at his staff standing frozen like they'd witnessed a murder. What, he said very quietly, is happening? Pancakes, Serafina replied, flipping one. Your daughter wanted pancakes. She eats oatmeal, I know. I heard. But today she's eating pancakes because she's a child, and children deserve to feel like children sometimes instead of tiny soldiers. The kitchen held its breath. Lucien's expression was unreadable. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down beside his daughter. Make enough for 2, he said. Serafina blinked. The staff looked like they might faint. Vivian looked at her father like he'd performed a miracle. You want pancakes, Serafina said slowly. You're already making them. You eat oatmeal. I eat what keeps me functional. He met her gaze. Today I'll eat pancakes. So she made pancakes. For a crime lord and his daughter in a kitchen that probably hadn't seen homemade breakfast in years. They ate in silence at first. Then Vivian started talking. About the snowman in the garden. About the story Serafina had told her yesterday. About wanting to learn piano, but being scared of the teacher. Lucien listened like he was hearing his daughter's voice for the first time. When breakfast ended and Vivian ran off to play, he stayed seated. Thank you, he said. Serafina started cleaning up. For what? I don't know, but it feels necessary. She looked at him, really looked, at the exhaustion carved into his face. The bandages she knew were still beneath his shirt because she changed them every night when he showed up at her door too proud to ask for help. The way his hands shook slightly from pain, he refused to acknowledge. You're going to tear your stitches if you keep pretending you're fine, she said. I am fine. You're bleeding through your shirt right now. Lucien glanced down. Dark red was seeping through the black fabric near his ribs. Fuck, he muttered. My room, 10 minutes. And bring better bandages than whatever field medic garbage your people have been using. She walked out before he could argue. 10 minutes later, he knocked. Serafina opened the door to find Lucien holding a medical kit that actually looked professional, his shirt already off, revealing the battlefield of his torso in daylight. The stitches on his left side had torn. Jesus, she breathed. What did you do? Walk downstairs. Stairs did not do that. He didn't answer. Serafina gestured him inside and locked the door. Sit. He sat on the edge of her bed while she pulled on gloves and examined the damage. The wound had reopened, not catastrophically, but enough that he'd need fresh sutures. This is going to hurt, she warned. Everything hurts. That's not an excuse to be stupid. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic and he didn't flinch. Didn't make a sound. Just sat there breathing slowly while she worked, his eyes tracking her movements with that predator focus she'd learned meant he was calculating something. You could have died, Serafina said, threading the needle. Multiple times. You still could if you keep acting like you're invincible. I'm not acting. You're delusional. I'm realistic. He watched her start the first suture. In my world, showing weakness is death. So I don't show it. Even to the people trying to keep you alive? especially to them. The honesty landed like a punch. Serafina tied off the stitch and started the next one, her hands steady despite the way her pulse hammered. Vivian's mother, she said carefully. How did she die? Lucien was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, crossfire. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong life. She knew what I was when we met. Thought she could handle it. Turned out bullets don't care about bravery. You loved her. I destroyed her. His voice went flat. Everything I touch turns to ash eventually. It's gravity, entropy, the natural order. That's fatalistic bullshit. It's pattern recognition. Serafina finished the sutures and started wrapping fresh bandages around his ribs. So what's your plan? Keep everyone at arm's length until you're alone? Raise Vivian in this gorgeous prison and call it protection? Better a prison than a grave. Is it, though? Her hand stilled on the bandage. Lucien's gaze found hers. You think I don't know what I'm doing to her? He said softly. You think I don't see the way she looks at you like you're everything I can't be? I know exactly what I am, Serafina. The question is whether you do. I know you're a man who got shot 16 times and survived, who loves his daughter enough to keep breathing when dying would be easier, who sits in my room at midnight because you're too proud to admit you need help. That's not love. That's survival instinct. Same thing sometimes. She finished the bandaging and stepped back. Lucien stood slowly, testing the new stitches, his bare torso marked with scars that told stories Serafina probably didn't want to know. Why are you still here? He asked. Where else would I go? Anywhere. I'd give you money, new identity, protection. You could disappear. And Vivian? His jaw tightened. Exactly, Serafina said. So I'm staying, even though it's dangerous, especially because of that. They stood facing each other in the quiet room while ocean wind rattled the windows, and somewhere downstairs Vivian was probably playing alone because that's what she'd learned to do in a house full of ghosts. You're either incredibly brave or phenomenally stupid, Lucien said. Most days I can't tell the difference. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. Then he put his shirt back on and left without another word. Serafina sat on the bed and tried to remember when exactly she'd stopped being afraid of him. The illusion lasted 3 more days. Then reality showed up at the gates with wire cutters and bad intentions. Serafina was reading in the library when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flooded the hallways. Security personnel materialized from nowhere running toward the east wing. Somewhere in the house, Vivian was screaming for her father. Serafina ran. She found Lucien in the main hall surrounded by armed men, his face carved from ice, a gun in his hand that looked almost casual except for the way his finger rested near the trigger. What's happening? She demanded. Breach, Marcus said tersely. South perimeter. Where's Vivian? Safe room, Lucien said without looking at her. She knows the drill. The fact that a 6-year-old had a drill for armed invasions made Serafina want to scream. How many? Lucien asked. 4 that we've confirmed. Could be more. Damien's people? Who else? Lucien's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. Seal the house. I want every entrance locked and every camera live. If they're inside, I want to know where. The men scattered. Lucien finally looked at Serafina. Go to Vivian, he said. What are you going to do? What I always do. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. He moved past her toward the east wing. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Marcus. Lucien! But he was already gone. Serafina stood alone in the massive hallway, listening to boots on marble and the sound of safeties clicking off weapons and her own heartbeat trying to break her ribs. She thought she understood what Lucien was. Now she was about to find out if she could live with the truth. The safe room was hidden behind a bookcase in Lucien's office. Serafina found it the way Lucien had once described, 3rd shelf, red spine, pull and twist. The bookcase swung open, revealing a steel door with a keypad. She didn't know the code. Vivian, she called. It's Serafina. Silence. Then the lock clicked. The door opened to reveal a little girl with tear-streaked cheeks holding her teddy bear like a weapon. Where's Papa? Vivian whispered. Handling things. Is he going to die? The question was so matter-of-fact, it broke Serafina's heart. No, she lied. He's going to be fine. You don't know that. You're right, I don't, but I know he's survived worse. Serafina stepped into the safe room and the door sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. The space was smaller than her old apartment. Reinforced walls, security monitors, emergency supplies, and a single cot that looked like it had been used before. This was where Vivian had learned to hide when her father's empire went to war. 6 years old, and she had a safe room. Serafina sat on the cot and pulled Vivian into her lap. On the monitors, she could see armed men moving through the mansion like shadows. Security cameras tracked them through hallways and rooms and spaces Serafina hadn't even known existed. Then she saw Lucy Yan, moving through the East Wing with 3 men flanking him, gun raised, every movement precise and lethal and completely terrifying because this wasn't the man who ate pancakes in the kitchen or showed up at midnight with torn stitches. This was the ghost. The monster Boston whispered about in back rooms and dark alleys, the crime lord who'd built an empire on violence and fear. He's different out there, Vivian said quietly, watching her father on the monitor. I know. Does it scare you? Yes. A little, Serafina admitted. Me too. Vivian pressed closer. But he's still Papa. They watched in silence as Lucian's team swept the mansion floor by floor, room by room, hunting whoever had breached the perimeter. Then the monitors went black. All of them, simultaneously. What happened? Vivian whispered. Serafina's training kicked in. Power failure. Backup generators should... The lights in the safe room flickered. Died. Emergency lighting came up, casting everything in red. Stay close to me, Serafina said, pulling Vivian tighter. Footsteps echoed outside the safe room. Heavy, wrong, too many. Someone tried the door handle. The lock held. Then a voice filtered through the steel. Male, amused, deadly. Cute hiding spot, but we have the schematics. Every room, every door, every little secret the ghost thought he buried. Vivian's breathing went sharp and shallow. Serafina covered the girl's mouth gently and pulled her toward the back corner of the safe room where the shadows were deepest. Tell Moretti we're taking what matters, the voice continued. He'll have 12 hours to make the trade. The girl for the territories. The girl. They were here for Vivian. Serafina's mind raced through options. The safe room was designed to hold against assault, but not indefinitely. Lucien was somewhere in the mansion fighting his own battle. Help wasn't coming. They were alone. Blow it, the voice said. Sir, the child... Damien wants her alive. He didn't say anything about comfortable. Serafina's blood went ice cold. She looked around the safe room, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon. Emergency supplies, medical kit, bottled water. Nothing. They were trapped. Then she saw it. An air vent near the ceiling, too small for her. Just big enough for a 6-year-old. Vivian, she whispered, I need you to be very brave. The little girl looked up at her with those huge dark eyes. The vent, Serafina said. Can you fit through it? I don't know. If I lift you up, can you try? Vivian nodded. The sound of drilling started at the safe room door. Serafina grabbed the cot and dragged it beneath the vent. Climbed up. Pulled Vivian up after her. The girl weighed almost nothing. Too thin, too fragile, too young for any of this. Listen to me, Serafina said urgently. You're going to crawl through that vent until you find another opening. Don't stop. Don't make noise. Don't come back. Find your father, or find Marcus, or find anyone with a gun who works for your family. Do you understand? What about you? I'll be right behind you. Another lie, but necessary. Serafina unscrewed the vent cover with shaking hands while behind them the drilling grew louder. She lifted Vivian up into the opening. Go, she whispered, fast as you can. I'm scared. Me too. Go anyway. Vivian crawled into the darkness. Serafina replaced the vent cover just as the safe room door exploded inward. 3 men flooded inside with tactical gear and weapons raised. They found Serafina standing in the middle of the empty room, hands raised, heart hammering. The lead man, the voice from outside, smiled. Where's the girl? Gone. He hit her. Serafina's head snapped sideways and blood filled her mouth, but she didn't go down. Years of standing through double shifts and emergency room chaos had taught her how to absorb impact. Where is the girl? I said gone. He raised his hand again. Wait. One of the other men gestured to the vent. Too late, Serafina thought. Too late. Check it. The man dragged the cot over and peered into the vent. It goes deep. She could be... Then go after her. It's too small. The lead man turned back to Serafina. Clever, he said, but useless. We own this house now. She's not getting out. Then he smiled, and Serafina saw her death in that expression. Damien said the girl comes alive, he continued. Didn't say anything about you. He raised his gun. Serafina closed her eyes. Thought about Vivian crawling through darkness. About Lucian somewhere fighting his own war. About the choices that had led her from a basement apartment to a crime lord's mansion to this moment with a barrel pressed against her forehead. About how she'd do it all again anyway because some people were worth dying for, even when logic said, run. The gunshot sounded like the end of the world, but Serafina didn't fall. The man with the gun did. Blood sprayed across the safe room as he collapsed. Behind him stood Lucian, face spattered with red, gun smoking, eyes absolutely empty of everything except violence. He shot the second man before he could raise his weapon, shot the third man while he was reaching for his radio. 3 bodies. 3 seconds. 3 shots so clean they could have been choreographed. Then Lucien looked at Serafina and something human flickered back into his eyes. Where's Vivienne? Serafina pointed at the vent. Lucien was moving before she finished explaining, ripping the vent cover off, calling into the darkness. Princess, it's Papa. Come back. Silence. Then a small voice echoed through the metal shaft. Papa? I'm here. Come back to me. Serafina heard scrambling. Moments later, Vivian's face appeared in the vent opening. Lucian pulled her out and held her so tight the little girl squeaked. I was brave, Vivienne whispered into his shoulder. Like Serafina said. You were perfect. Lucian kissed her forehead, then looked at Serafina over his daughter's head. No words, just a look that said everything. Thank you. I'm sorry. This is who I am. Serafina nodded once, understanding passing between them in the red emergency light surrounded by corpses and gun smoke and the wreckage of the illusion that any of them could ever be normal. Boss! Marcus appeared in the doorway. We got them all. 5 hostiles down. The rest retreated. Casualties? 2 of ours wounded, none dead. Secure the perimeter. I want every inch of this property swept. If they left anything behind, cameras, bugs, explosives, I want it found. Marcus nodded and left. Lucien set Vivienne down carefully, his hands lingering on her shoulders like he needed to confirm she was real. Go with Marcus, he said gently. Let him check you for injuries. I'm okay, Papa. I know. Let him check anyway. Vivian looked at Serafina. Serafina forced a smile. I'll be right there. The little girl left. Alone now except for the bodies, Lucien turned to face Serafina fully. They came for her, he said. His voice was completely flat, emotionless. The tone of someone delivering a weather report instead of discussing his daughter's attempted kidnapping. Damien sent them to take Vivian, use her as leverage, force me to give up territory. I know. This is my world, Serafina. This is what you signed up for when you pulled me out of the snow. I know that too. Do you? He stepped closer. Because it's going to get worse. Damien won't stop. He'll keep coming, keep escalating, keep using every weakness he can find until one of us is dead. Then kill him first. The words came out before she could stop them. Cold, practical, monstrous. Lucien stared at her. That's your advice? Kill him? You're asking a nurse who spent 16 hours digging bullets out of you to suddenly develop moral qualms about violence? Serafina laughed, and it sounded broken. I crossed that line the second I didn't call the police. I crossed it again when I came here. And I definitely crossed it when I sent a 6-year-old into an air vent to escape armed kidnappers. So, yeah, kill him before he kills you, before he takes Vivian, before any of this gets worse. You don't mean that. I mean it more than I've meant anything in my life. They stood in the red light surrounded by death.
This changes you, Lucien said quietly. Violence, blood, survival. It changes who you are until you can't remember what you were before. Then I'll change. Serafina met his gaze. I've changed before. I can do it again. Not like this. You don't get to decide what I can handle. Trying to protect you.
By keeping me at arm's length? By pretending I don't see what you are? By treating me like I'm made of glass? She shook her head. I'm still standing, Lucien. After everything. I'm still here. That should tell you something. It tells me you're dangerous. Good. Be scared of me. At least it's honest. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. Or something darker that made Serafina's pulse kick despite the bodies cooling at their feet. If you stay, Lucien said slowly, you stay all the way. No more illusions. No more pretending this is temporary. You'll be part of this world, my world, and everything that comes with it. I already am. Then prove it. He pulled a gun from his jacket and held it out to her. Serafina looked at the weapon, at Lucien's blood-spattered face, at the bodies on the floor, at the choice she'd known was coming since the moment she dragged a dying man out of the snow. She took the gun. It was heavier than expected, colder, real in a way that made her hands shake. Safety's here, Lucien said, showing her. Trigger pulls smooth. Aim center mass. Shoot until the threat stops moving. I know how guns work. Knowing and using are different things. Then teach me. The words hung between them like a promise, like a confession, like the exact moment Serafina Vale stopped being a nurse who made bad decisions and became something else entirely. Lucien smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Tomorrow, he said, when the sun comes up and Vivian's asleep and the blood's been cleaned from the floors, I'll teach you how to survive in a world that wants you dead. Why wait until tomorrow? Because tonight I need to bury 5 men and explain to my daughter why her home isn't safe anymore. And because you need to decide if you really meant what you just said. He walked out, left Serafina standing alone with a gun in her hands, and the taste of blood in her mouth, and the absolute certainty that she'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. She should have been terrified, should have been sick, should have been anything except the cold clarity settling over her like armor. But Serafina had learned a long time ago that survival didn't care about should, only about what came next. She checked the safety on the gun, tucked it into her waistband, and went to find Vivian. Because whatever she'd become, whatever she was becoming, that little girl still needed someone who'd crawl into air vents and lie about being scared. And Serafina was very good at lying when it mattered. Three days later, Damien Voss received a package at his penthouse. Inside was a photograph. Serafina Vale standing in the Moretti Mansion's gun range, weapon raised, target shredded behind her. And written on the back in Lucien's handwriting, "She's mine now. Come and take her." Damien looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he smiled and started planning how to burn Lucien Moretti's entire world to ash. The gun range in the Moretti estate's basement smelled like cordite and old concrete. Serafina stood with her feet shoulder-width apart, weapon raised, hands steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. The target downrange was already shredded, center mass obliterated by rounds she'd fired with increasing accuracy over the past week. Lucien stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, his voice low in her ear. Again, she fired. The recoil kicked through her arms like a living thing, but she controlled it, absorbed it, let muscle memory take over the way Lucien had taught her. The target acquired a fresh hole exactly where she'd aimed. "Better," Lucien said, "but you're still thinking too much. When someone's coming at you, thought gets you killed. Instinct keeps you breathing. Instinct says run. Then we're retraining your instincts." He moved around to face her, taking the gun from her hands and checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. His fingers brushed hers, and Serafina felt the contact like electricity despite the clinical nature of the touch. 3 weeks. That's how long she'd been living in this mansion, learning to shoot, to fight, to survive in a world where violence was currency and hesitation was fatal. 3 weeks since the breach. 3 weeks since she'd stopped being a nurse and started becoming something else. Something harder, colder, necessary. "You're getting good at this," Lucien said, handing the gun back. "That should worry you. Everything about this worries me. But you're still here. Where else would I go?" It had become their refrain. A question neither of them could answer honestly, because the truth was too complicated and too simple at the same time. She stayed because of Vivian. She stayed because leaving felt like abandoning something unfinished. She stayed because somewhere between digging bullets from Lucien's chest and learning to fire them herself, the mansion had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like the only place she understood. "Damien's been quiet," Lucien said, changing the subject. "Too quiet. Maybe he's planning." "Definitely planning." He leaned against the shooting bench, arms crossed, exhaustion carved into his face, despite the careful neutrality of his expression. "The question is what?" "You could ask him. I could put a bullet in him." "That too." Lucien smiled without warmth. "You're developing a concerning bloodthirst for someone who used to save lives." "I still save lives, just different ones now." The basement door opened and Marcus appeared, his expression grim enough to make Serafina's stomach drop. "Boss, we got a problem." The problem was waiting in Lucien's office. A woman. Mid-40s, expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than Serafina's entire nursing school education. She stood by the window overlooking the Atlantic with the kind of confidence that came from holding cards nobody else knew existed. "Mr. Moretti," she said without turning, "thank you for seeing me. I don't recall inviting you." "You didn't, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." She turned finally, and Serafina recognized the look in her eyes. "Lawyer, predator, threat. My name is Catherine Wells. I represent the estate of Margaret Ashford." Lucien went very still, the kind of still that meant violence was about to happen. "Margaret's dead," he said flatly. "Yes, 3 years ago. Cancer." Catherine opened her briefcase. But before she died, she made certain arrangements regarding her granddaughter's custody. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. "Get out," Lucien said. "I'm afraid I can't do that." Catherine pulled out a document and set it on the desk. "This is a court order granting Margaret Ashford's estate temporary custody of Vivian Moretti, pending a full hearing on parental fitness." Serafina's medical training kicked in, checking Lucien's hands for tremors, his breathing for changes, any sign he was about to explode, but he just stood there radiating controlled fury. "On what grounds?" he asked quietly. "On the grounds that a 6-year-old child was nearly kidnapped from her home 3 weeks ago due to her father's criminal activities. On the grounds that said child has been living in what can only be described as an armed compound. On the grounds that CPS has received multiple anonymous tips about an unsafe environment." "Anonymous tips from whom?" Catherine smiled. "You know I can't reveal that." But Serafina knew. Everyone in that room knew. Damien. This was Damien's play. "You have 72 hours, Catherine continued. "After that, if you haven't surrendered Vivian voluntarily, federal marshals will come for her, and given your history, Mr. Moretti, I imagine they'll come prepared for resistance." "You walk into my house," Lucien said, voice dropping to something lethal, "and threaten to take my daughter, and you think you're walking back out?" Marcus moved toward the door, blocking the exit. Catherine didn't flinch. "If I don't check in with my office in 30 minutes, that court order becomes a warrant for your arrest on kidnapping and custodial interference charges. You'll be in federal custody by nightfall, and Vivian will be removed by force." She picked up her briefcase. 72 hours, Mr. Moretti. Use them wisely." She walked past Marcus without hesitation. The door closed behind her. Silence filled the office like poison gas. Then Lucien picked up a crystal decanter and hurled it against the wall. Glass exploded. Whiskey streamed down expensive wallpaper. "Boss," Marcus started. "Get out. We can fight this. We can—" "I said get out." Marcus left. Serafina stayed. She watched Lucien stand amid the wreckage of his control, breathing hard, hands clenched into fists, every muscle vibrating with rage he couldn't unleash because the enemy was a lawyer with paperwork instead of a man with a gun. "This is Damien," she said quietly. "I know. He's using the system against you.
I know. So what are we going to do? Lucien looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. I don't know.
That night, Serafina found Vivian in the library. The little girl sat curled in an oversized chair reading a book about birds, her teddy bear tucked under one arm, completely unaware that her entire world was about to implode. "Hey, princess," Serafina said softly. Vivian looked up and smiled. "Serafina, look, this one's called a puffin. They look silly." "They do." Serafina sat down beside her. "Can we talk about something?" The smile faded. Kids always knew. Somehow they always knew when adults were about to deliver bad news. "What's wrong?" Vivian whispered. Serafina had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head. None of the scripts worked, so she went with the truth. "There are some people who think you'd be safer living somewhere else for a little while."
Away from Papa?
"Yes."
Why?
"Because they're scared that living here is dangerous for you." Vivienne processed this with the terrible wisdom of a child who'd grown up in violence. "Is it because of the bad men who came?" she asked. "Partly. But Papa keeps me safe." "I know he does." "Then why do I have to leave?" The question broke Serafina's heart. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense to kids. This is one of those times. I don't want to go." "I know, sweetheart. Will you come with me?" The hope in that question was unbearable.
I don't think they'll let me, Serafina admitted.
Vivian's eyes filled with tears.
"I don't want to go without you, or Papa. I don't want to go at all."
She started crying. Quiet, hitching sobs that shook her small frame. Serafina pulled her close and held her while the little girl cried into her shoulder, and somewhere in the back of her mind she was making calculations. Measuring options, weighing consequences, becoming exactly what Lucien had warned her about. Someone who'd do terrible things for the people she loved. Midnight found Serafina in Lucien's office. He sat behind his desk, surrounded by legal documents, whiskey glass in hand, looking like a king watching his empire burn. "We could run," Serafina said. Lucien looked up. "What?" "Take Vivian and run. New identities, new country. Disappear before the 72 hours are up. They'd find us. Maybe. Maybe not.
And then what? Spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Raise Vivian in hiding? That's not living, Serafina. That's just slower dying. It's better than losing her." "Is it?" He stood, moving to the window. "I've spent my entire life running from consequences, building walls, hiding behind guns and money and fear, and all it's gotten me is alone in a mansion, watching my daughter cry herself to sleep because she thinks I can't protect her." "You can protect her. Not from this. Not from lawyers and court orders, and a system designed to take children from monsters." He finished his whiskey. "Maybe they're right. Maybe she would be better off. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore." Serafina crossed the office until she stood beside him, both of them staring out at the dark Atlantic. "I believe," she said slowly, "that Damien orchestrated this entire thing. The custody challenge, the anonymous tips, the court order. He's using the system as a weapon because he knows you can't fight back the same way you'd fight his soldiers. So we fight differently." Lucien turned to look at her. "How?" "We find out who Margaret Ashford was, who inherited her estate, who's funding this custody challenge. We follow the money until we find Damien's fingerprints. And then? Then we make him withdraw the challenge. By force? By leverage." Serafina met his gaze. "You said Damien wants your empire. Fine. Give it to him." Lucien stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want me to surrender?" "I want you to look like you're surrendering. Make the deal. Trade territories for Vivian. Get him to pull the custody order. Then what? Then you take everything back and make sure he never threatens your daughter again." The silence stretched. Lucien studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "That's not fighting differently," he said quietly. "That's fighting exactly like I would." "Then I'm learning from the best." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, respect. something darker that made Serafina's pulse kick. "You've changed," he said. "I had good teachers." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It's a fact."
They stood close enough that Serafina could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count the scars on his hands, could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing between them like atmosphere before a storm. "If we do this," Lucian said, "there's no going back. Not for either of us. I crossed that line weeks ago. Not like this. This is declaring war. On Damien. On his entire organization. On anyone who thinks they can use my daughter as leverage." "Good. Let them know. People will die."
They were going to die anyway. At least this way it's the right people. Lucian smiled, sharp and cold and absolutely lethal. "Okay," he said. "We'll do it your way. But first, we need information. I know someone who might help." "Who?" Serafina pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts she hadn't called in months. Found the number. Hesitated. This was the last bridge. The final step across the line from civilian to criminal. She made the call.
It rang 3 times. Then a tired voice answered. "Serafina? Jesus Christ, where have you been? The clinic's been looking for—" "I need a favor, David." Silence. Dr. David Chen had been the attending physician at the free clinic, had trained Serafina, had become something like a friend in a world where friends were rare. "What kind of favor?" he asked carefully. "The kind you don't ask questions about." More silence. "Are you in trouble?" "I'm in something. I can't explain. But I need access to hospital records, specifically patient files from 3 years ago. Margaret Ashford, cancer patient." "Serafina, please." The desperation in her own voice surprised her. David sighed. "I can't get you full records, but I can look up basics. Why do you need this?" "Because someone's using her death to hurt a little girl, and I need to know who benefits." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." She heard typing in the background. "Margaret Ashford," David said, "died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Affluent family. Estate went to—" "Huh. What?" "Estate was divided between multiple beneficiaries, but the executor is listed as someone named Richard Voss." The name hit like a bullet. "Say that again," Serafina said. "Richard Voss, attorney. Why?" "Because Richard Voss was Damien Voss's brother." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. "Thanks, David. I owe you." "Serafina, what's—" She hung up, turned to Lucien. "It's not just Damien," she said. "His brother's a lawyer. He's the one executing Margaret Ashford's estate. The custody challenge isn't coming from Vivian's grandmother's family. It's coming from Damien wearing a legal mask." Lucian's expression went arctic. "So we can't fight it in court," he said, "because the court is already compromised. Unless we can prove the executor has a conflict of interest." "How?" "We connect Richard Voss to Damien's criminal organization, prove they're working together, get him disbarred, and the whole custody challenge collapses. That could take months. We have 72 hours. They stared at each other, the impossible weight of the timeline pressing down like gravity. "There might be another way," Lucian said slowly. "What?" "Margaret Ashford wasn't Vivian's grandmother. She was my first wife's mother. We divorced before Vivian was born. Legally, Margaret had no claim to custody. Then why would her estate—" "Because someone forged documents making it look like she had standing, probably Richard Voss." Lucian pulled out his phone. "I need to make a call." He dialed. Waited. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "I need everything you have on Richard Voss. Financial records, client lists, anyone he's talked to in the past 6 months, because I'm about to destroy his entire life and I want to do it thoroughly." He hung up, looked at Serafina. 48 hours, he said. "That's how long it'll take my people to build a case. Then we take it to the judge and bury Richard Voss so deep he'll need a ladder to see sunlight. And if it doesn't work, then we go back to your plan. War." 36 hours later, everything fell apart. Serafina was reading to Vivian when the alarms started. Not the breach alarms. Something worse. Marcus burst into the library, face pale, gun drawn. "We need to move," he said. "Now." "What's happening?" Serafina demanded. "Federal raid. They're at the gates. Her stomach dropped. They weren't supposed to come for another day. Someone moved up the timeline. Vivian started crying. Serafina scooped her up and ran, following Marcus through hallways that suddenly felt like a maze designed to trap them. Behind them, she could hear doors being smashed open, commands being shouted, the systematic destruction of any illusion of safety. "Where's Lucien?" she gasped. "Meeting with his lawyers. He doesn't know yet." They reached the safe room. Marcus punched in the code. The door swung open. "Inside," he ordered. "Don't come out until—" A voice cut through the chaos. "United States Marshals, drop your weapon!" Marcus hesitated. Serafina saw the calculation flash across his face, saw him weigh loyalty against survival, saw him make the only choice he could. He dropped the gun, raised his hands. Federal agents flooded the hallway. Serafina clutched Vivian and backed into the safe room, but strong hands grabbed her arms, pulling her back out. "Ma'am, we need you to let go of the child." "No." "Ma'am." She's terrified. "I'm not letting go. We have a court order for protective custody. The child needs to come with us." Vivian screamed, wrapped herself around Serafina like if she held on tight enough the world couldn't tear them apart. "Please," Serafina begged. "Please don't do this. She's not in danger here. This is her home." "Step aside, ma'am." "I'm a nurse. Let me stay with her. Let me—" Hands pried Vivian away. The little girl's screams echoed through the mansion. "Serafina! Serafina, please!" "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." But she wasn't. They were dragging her backward while other agents carried Vivian toward the exit, and Serafina fought like a cornered animal, kicking and clawing and screaming until someone's fist connected with her stomach and all the air left her lungs. She collapsed, gasping, broken. Watching Vivian disappear down the hallway calling for her. "Mama! Mama, please!" The word hit harder than any fist. Mama. Not Serafina. Mama. Then they were gone. Serafina knelt on cold marble surrounded by federal agents, hands zip-tied behind her back, lungs burning, heart shattered into pieces small enough to slip through her ribs. This was what Lucien had warned her about. This was the cost of loving people in his world. This was losing. Mosit. They took her to a room in the mansion she'd never seen before. Some kind of interrogation space the marshals had commandeered. A woman in a severe suit sat across from her. Agent Ramirez, according to the badge. "Miss Vale," she said, "do you know why you're here?" "Because you kidnapped a 6-year-old. We removed a minor from an unsafe environment. She was safe with me. Were you?" Ramirez opened a folder. "Serafina Vale, 28, registered nurse. No criminal record until 3 weeks ago when you disappeared from your apartment and your job without notice. Now you're living with Lucien Moretti, known crime lord, in a mansion that was just breached by armed hostiles." "I was helping his daughter." "You were enabling a criminal." "I was keeping a little girl alive." Ramirez leaned back. "Here's what I think happened. I think you got pulled into something you didn't understand. I think Moretti used you, maybe through his daughter, maybe through money, maybe through fear. I think you're a victim here." "I'm not a victim." "Then what are you?" "Good question." Serafina didn't have an answer anymore. "Where's Vivian?" she asked instead. "In protective custody. She'll be evaluated by child services, then placed with appropriate family." "She doesn't have appropriate family. Her mother's dead. Her father loves her. Her grandmother's been dead for 3 years. The whole custody challenge is a fraud." "That's not what the court order says." "The court order is based on forged documents. Margaret Ashford had no legal standing for custody. Check the records. Check the marriage certificates. Check anything." Ramirez made a note. "We'll look into it." "When?" "When we have time." "You don't have time. Someone's using the system to kidnap that little girl and you're helping them." "Or," Ramirez said calmly, "we're protecting a child from a dangerous environment and you're too close to see it clearly." The door opened. Another agent stepped in and whispered something to Ramirez. Her expression changed, hardened. "Miss Vale," she said, "did you know Lucien Moretti is currently missing?" Serafina's blood went cold. "What?" "He left the estate approximately 2 hours ago. Never made it to his lawyer's office. His car was found abandoned near the Harbor District. That's not possible." His security team is also missing. 3 men, all gone. No, 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 no. This wasn't supposed to happen, Serafina whispered. What wasn't? But Serafina knew. Damien. This was all Damien. The custody challenge had been a distraction. Get federal agents to raid the mansion. Remove Vivian. Separate Lucien from his protection. Then take him. Where's Damien Voss? Serafina demanded. Ramirez frowned. Who? Damien Voss. He's behind this. He's the one who orchestrated the custody challenge through his brother Richard. He's the one who… Miss Vale, you're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You're just not listening. She tried to stand, but the zip ties cut into her wrists, and agent hands pushed her back down into the chair. Let me go, Serafina said. Please, Vivian needs… Vivian is being cared for by professionals. She needs me. She needs stability, safety, normal. I am her normal. The words came out raw, desperate, true. Ramirez closed her folder. Miss Vale, I'm going to be straight with you. You're not being charged with anything right now, but you're also not free to leave. We have questions about your involvement with Lucien Moretti's organization. You'll be held as a material witness until we sort this out. How long? As long as it takes. They let her out, put her in a car, drove her through Boston while the city burned sunset colors across the harbor, and Serafina pressed her forehead against the window, trying not to scream. Vivian was gone. Lucien was missing. Everything she'd tried to protect had been ripped away in less than an hour. The car stopped at a federal building. They processed her like a criminal. Fingerprints, photos, questions she refused to answer. Then they put her in a holding cell and left her alone with the wreckage of her choices. Serafina sat on the narrow cot and tried to think, tried to plan, tried to do anything except replay Vivian's screams over and over. The cell door opened. A guard stepped in. You have a visitor. Serafina looked up. Catherine Wells stood in the hallway, the lawyer who'd delivered the custody challenge. What do you want? Serafina asked. To talk. I have nothing to say to you. Not even about Vivian? Serafina stood slowly. What about her? Catherine entered the cell and the guard closed the door behind her, giving them privacy. She's been asking for you, Catherine said. Constantly. Won't eat, won't sleep, just keeps saying she wants her mama. The words stabbed deep. Where is she? Temporary foster placement. Good family. They're trying, but she's traumatized. Then let me see her. I can't do that. Why not? Catherine sat on the opposite cot, looking suddenly tired. Because I'm not actually here on behalf of Margaret Ashford's estate. Serafina's stomach dropped. What? I was hired by Damien Voss to file the custody challenge. Paid very well to make sure it went through regardless of the legal validity. The admission hung in the air like poison. Why are you telling me this? Serafina asked. Because Damien just doubled the contract. He wants Vivian permanently, full custody transferred to a family he controls. She'll disappear into the system and Lucien Moretti will never find her. You can't. I already did. The paperwork's filed. By this time tomorrow, Vivian will be on a plane to somewhere far from Boston and far from her father. Serafina lunged, grabbed Catherine by the collar, slammed her against the cell wall. You're selling a 6-year-old to a crime lord and you came here to what? Gloat? Catherine didn't fight back, just looked at Serafina with something that might have been shame. I came to offer you a choice, she said quietly. What choice? Damien wants Lucien broken. Wants him to suffer. The best way to do that is through his daughter. But there's a second option, someone else he cares about. Understanding crashed over Serafina like ice water. Me. You. Damien knows about you. Knows what you mean to Lucien. He's willing to trade. You for Vivian. You disappear. Vivian goes home, Lucien gets his daughter back, but loses you. And if I say no, then Vivian vanishes and you rot in federal custody while Damien dismantles everything Lucien built. Either way, he wins. Serafina's hands shook. This was the choice. This was the moment. Everything she'd become in the past month crystallized into a single decision. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens to me? I don't know. Damien didn't share that part. I could die. Probably.
And you're okay with that? Catherine looked away. I'm a lawyer. I've made peace with worse. Serafina released her, stepped back. Her medical training kicked in, evaluating options, weighing outcomes, calculating survival. But this wasn't a trauma bay. This was a choice between saving herself and saving a little girl who called her mama, which wasn't really a choice at all. Okay, Serafina said. Okay. I'll do it. I'll trade myself for Vivian, but I have conditions. You're not in a position to negotiate. I am if Damien wants me compliant instead of fighting every step. Serafina met Catherine's gaze. Vivian goes back to the estate tonight. Full custody to Lucian. All charges dropped. The whole custody challenge withdrawn. That's already... And you tell Lucian I did this voluntarily, that I made the choice, that he doesn't come after me because if he does, Damien kills us both. Catherine studied her face. You're protecting him. I'm protecting both of them. By sacrificing yourself. By doing what I've always done, saving the people in front of me. The lawyer pulled out her phone, made a call. Spoke in low tones Serafina couldn't quite hear. Then she hung up. Damien agrees, but you leave tonight, right now. No goodbyes. I didn't expect any. Catherine knocked on the cell door. The guard opened it. 2 men in expensive suits stood in the hallway, not federal agents, Damien's people. This was real. This was happening. Serafina took a breath and walked toward them, leaving behind the wreckage of her life and the little girl she'd loved and the crime lord who taught her how to survive in darkness. They grabbed her arms, led her through the building, out a back entrance, into a black van. The door slammed shut, darkness swallowed her whole, and Serafina Vale disappeared. Volkic. 12 hours later, Lucien Moretti woke in a warehouse, hands zip-tied, blood in his mouth. Damien Voss standing over him smiling. Welcome back, Damien said. I was starting to think I'd hit you too hard. Lucien's vision swam. He cataloged injuries, ribs cracked, shoulder dislocated, concussion probable, survivable. Where's my daughter? He rasped. Safe, back home, exactly where you wanted her. What? The custody challenge has been withdrawn. Vivian's free. Congratulations. Nothing about this made sense. Why? Damien crouched down until they were eye level. Because I found a better way to break you, he said. Your daughter's fine, Lucien. But Serafina Vale? She made a trade, herself for Vivian. Noble, stupid, exactly what I expected from someone who thinks she can save the world one monster at a time. The words took a moment to process. Then they hit like bullets. Where is she? Somewhere you'll never find her. I made sure of that. I'll kill you. Maybe. Eventually. But first you're going to suffer. You're going to live knowing you got your daughter back because Serafina gave herself up. That the woman who saved your life, who learned to kill for you, who became exactly what you needed, she's gone. And it's your fault. Lucien tried to lunge, but the restraints held. Damien laughed. You know what the best part is? She made me promise to tell you not to come after her. Said if you tried, I'd kill you both. So now you have to choose. Honor her sacrifice and live without her, or chase her and watch her die. He stood, walked toward the warehouse exit, paused at the door. I win, Lucien. I took everything that mattered and left you alive to feel it. That's worse than death. That's victory. Then he was gone. Lucien knelt in the empty warehouse surrounded by his own blood and the echo of choices that had led him here. And for the first time in his life, the ghost monarch broke. Lucien Moretti stopped breaking after 17 minutes, not because the pain lessened, not because hope returned, but because rage burned hotter than grief, and somewhere in the wreckage of his sanity, the ghost woke up. He'd been kneeling in his own blood long enough for it to dry sticky against his skin. The warehouse around him was silent, except for the drip of water through broken pipes and the distant rumble of harbor traffic. Damien had left him alive deliberately. No guards, no execution, just abandonment designed to maximize suffering. Mistake. Lucien forced his dislocated shoulder against the concrete pillar behind him and shoved hard. The joint popped back into place with a wet crack that echoed through the empty space. White-hot pain exploded across his vision, but he swallowed the scream and kept moving. The zip ties around his wrists were industrial grade, but his hands were slick with blood.
He twisted, pulled, felt plastic cutting deeper into already raw skin. Didn't matter. Pain was just information. Information he could ignore. 5 minutes of methodical work, and the restraint snapped. Lucian stood on legs that barely held him and assessed damage. Cracked ribs. Dislocated shoulder now relocated. Concussion probable. Blood loss significant, but not critical. Combat effectiveness maybe 60%. Good enough. He found his phone smashed in the corner. Found his gun missing. Found the warehouse door unlocked because Damien wanted him to walk out broken. Wanted him to go home to his daughter and live with the weight of Serafina's sacrifice. Wanted him to give up. Lucien stepped into cold Boston night and smiled through split lips. He'd give Damien something, but it wouldn't be surrender. Cut. The Moretti estate looked like a crime scene. Federal vehicles still lined the driveway. Yellow tape cordoned off sections of the mansion. Armed agents moved through rooms cataloging evidence that would never make it to trial because Lucian owned half the judges in Boston, and the other half were smart enough to stay bought. He walked through the front door covered in blood. 3 agents drew weapons. "Stand down," their commander said, recognizing him. "Mr. Moretti, you need medical attention." "I need my daughter." "Sir." Lucian kept walking. They didn't stop him. He found Vivian in her bedroom surrounded by child services workers who scattered when they saw his face. The little girl looked up from where she sat clutching her teddy bear, eyes red from crying, and something in Lucien's chest shattered and reformed simultaneously. "Papa," she whispered. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, despite the way his ribs screamed protest. She wrapped herself around him like if she held tight enough the world couldn't tear them apart again. "You came back," Vivian said into his shoulder. "Always." "They took Serafina." "I know." "Are you going to get her?" The question hung in the air between them. Lucian thought about Damien's words, about the choice he'd been given. Honor Serafina's sacrifice and live without her, or chase her and watch her die. He looked at his daughter's face, saw Serafina in every expression Vivian made now. The way she tilted her head when thinking, the stubborn set of her jaw when upset, the kindness that somehow survived, despite growing up in darkness. "Yes," Lucian said. "I'm going to get her." "Promise?" "Promise." It was the easiest lie he'd ever told and the truest thing he'd ever meant. Marcus found him 2 hours later in the basement gym, hitting a heavy bag with methodical brutality, despite the way each impact sent pain screaming through damaged ribs. "Boss," Marcus said carefully, "we need to talk." Lucien hit the bag again. "Talk." "The feds are clearing out. Custody challenge is officially withdrawn. Vivian's legally yours. Whatever Damien did, it worked." "I know." "So what's the play?" "We find Serafina." "Boss?" Lucien stopped hitting the bag and turned. Blood seeped through the bandages wrapped around his knuckles. Sweat mixed with older blood on his face. His eyes looked like winter. "We find her," he repeated. "I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. We find her and we bring her home." Marcus nodded slowly. Damien's going to be expecting that. "Good. Let him prepare. Won't matter. He could kill her the moment we get close. He could have killed her already and didn't. He wants me to suffer. That means keeping her alive as leverage." Lucien grabbed a towel. "Start pulling resources. I want every person Damien's talked to in the past month, every property he owns, every account he accesses. I want his entire life mapped and ready to burn." "That's going to take 48 hours. I'm giving him 48 hours of thinking he won. Then we go to war." Marcus left to make calls. Lucien stood alone in the basement, surrounded by weapons and weights, and the ghost of Serafina teaching him how to be human again, and made himself a promise. Damien Voss wanted to break him through suffering. Fine. Let him try. But when the ghost came for vengeance, Damien would learn that some monsters loved hard enough to burn the world down. Serafina woke to darkness and the smell of salt water. Her head throbbed, her wrists were bound. The floor beneath her rocked slightly with a rhythm that meant she was on a boat. She forced her eyes to adjust and took inventory. Small cabin, porthole showing nothing but black ocean, single door secured from the outside. Her nursing scrubs replaced with plain clothes she didn't recognize. No obvious injuries beyond the knot on her skull where someone had hit her. Professional kidnapping. Damien's people had practice. The door opened. A man stepped in, mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of professionally neutral expression that meant private security, or worse. "You're awake," he observed. "Where am I?" "On a boat." "I figured that out. Where's the boat going?" "Somewhere Mr. Voss owns. That's all you need to know." Serafina tested the restraints binding her wrists. Zip ties again. Tight enough to restrict circulation, but not tight enough to cause immediate damage. They wanted her functional, which meant she had value, which meant negotiation was possible. "I want to talk to Damien," she said. "He'll talk to you when he's ready. Tell him I have information about Lucien's organization, asset locations, security protocols, financial accounts." The man studied her face. "You'd betray him? I'd do whatever keeps me alive long enough to escape and kill everyone responsible for this." Honesty worked better than lies sometimes. The man almost smiled. "I'll pass along the message." He left. Locked the door. Serafina sat in the rocking darkness and started planning. She'd spent a month learning to survive in Lucien's world, learning to shoot, to fight, to think like someone who valued survival over morality. The training kicked in now, assessing escape routes, cataloging potential weapons, calculating odds. The porthole was too small to fit through. The door was solid steel. The zip ties would take time to break. But time was a weapon too. Every hour Damien kept her alive was another hour Lucien had to find her. If he was looking, if he wasn't honoring her sacrifice, if she meant enough. The doubt crept in like cold water. Serafina pushed it back down and started working on the zip ties with methodical patience, using the sharp edge of a bolt protruding from the cabin wall to saw through plastic fiber by fiber. She'd saved a crime lord's life once. She could save her own. Debug. 48 hours passed like years. Lucien spent them becoming the monster he'd tried to leave behind. His people mapped Damien's entire empire. 18 properties across 3 states, 14 shell companies, 27 known associates, every thread connecting back to one central truth. Damien Voss had been planning this war for months, and Serafina's kidnapping was just the opening move. "He's consolidating power," Marcus reported during their 3rd strategy session. "Taking over territories while you're distracted. 5 of our operations hit in the past day. He thinks you're broken." "Let him think that," Lucien said, studying the map spread across his desk. "What about Serafina?" "No confirmed sightings, but we tracked movement on one of Damien's boats leaving Boston Harbor the night she disappeared. Headed south. Coast Guard lost it near Rhode Island. He took her by water. Looks like. Check every marina, every private dock, every property with boat access. Start in Rhode Island and work south. That's hundreds of locations. Then use hundreds of people. I don't care what it costs." Marcus made notes. "Boss, even if we find her, extracting her from Damien's custody without getting her killed, we'll get her out." "How?" Lucien looked up and Marcus saw something in those gray eyes that made him step back instinctively. "However necessary," Lucien said quietly. "Tech." On the 3rd day they found her. A private estate on the Connecticut coast, registered to a shell company owned by Richard Voss, Damien's lawyer brother. Satellite imagery showed a main house, guest house, private dock, and enough security to guard a head of state. "That's where she is," Lucien said with absolute certainty. "We don't have confirmation," Marcus warned. "We don't need it. Damien's using his brother's property because he thinks the legal shield protects him. It doesn't. We hit this, we're starting an all-out war. We're finishing one." Lucien assembled his team. 12 men, handpicked, loyal enough to follow him into certain death and skilled enough that death wouldn't be certain. They met in the estate's armory where enough weapons to outfit a small militia waited on steel racks. Lucien methodically selected gear, body armor, tactical rig, enough ammunition to siege a compound, and the same gun he'd carried when he built his empire through blood and fear. The ghost was going hunting. "We go in quiet," he briefed the team. "Extract Serafina. Anyone who gets between us and her goes down. No hesitation, no mercy. Questions?" "What about Damien?" one of the men asked. "If he's there, he dies. If he's not, we'll find him after." They loaded into vehicles and drove south through pre-dawn darkness. Lucien sat in the back watching Connecticut coastline blur past and thought about Serafina, about her hands pulling bullets from his chest, about her voice reading to him in a basement apartment, about the way she'd called his mansion a tomb and brought it back to life through sheer stubborn kindness, about Vivian calling her mama, about everything he'd never said because men like him didn't know how to speak in anything except violence and silence. If she died before he could fix that, he'd burn the world to ash. Starting with Damien Voss. Book. The estate materialized through morning fog like something out of a nightmare. High walls. Surveillance cameras. Armed guards patrolling perimeter. The kind of security that screamed guilt and fear. Lucien's team split into 3 groups. Group 1 would breach from the water using the private dock. Group 2 would cut power and communications. Group 3, Lucien and Marcus, would go through the front gate and make enough noise that everyone inside would focus on them instead of the real threat coming from the harbor. Distraction and extraction. Simple. Brutal. Likely to get someone killed. On my mark, Lucien said into the radio. He waited until everyone confirmed position. Took a breath. Remembered Serafina's face the last time he'd seen her, covered in flour making pancakes for his daughter, while his staff watched like she'd performed a miracle. Mark. The power cut first, lights dying across the estate. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but those crucial moments of darkness were enough. Group 1 hit the dock. Group 2 moved on secondary objectives. Lucien drove straight through the front gate. Metal shrieked. Alarms screamed. Guards materialized from security stations with weapons raised, but Lucien was already moving, out of the vehicle, gun up, firing with the kind of precision that came from decades of violence. 2 guards down before they could aim. 3 more scrambling for cover. Marcus flanked right, providing suppression fire. Lucien advanced through the chaos like he was back in the days before empires and mansions, when survival meant being faster, meaner, and more willing to die than the other guy. A bullet cracked past his ear. He returned fire. Another guard fell. The front door exploded inward from charges Group 1 had planted. Smoke filled the entryway. Lucien moved through it into the main house, clearing rooms methodically while somewhere in the back of his mind he registered gunfire from other sections, meaning his team was engaged. Acceptable. Necessary. He'd mourn the casualties later. First floor clear, second floor accessed via a grand staircase that had probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Lucien took the steps 2 at a time despite the way his still-healing ribs protested. Top of the stairs, hallway stretching in both directions. Clear left, a voice crackled in his radio. One of Group 1. Clear right, another voice. That left center. Lucien kicked open the first door. Empty bedroom. Second door, office. Third door, locked. He stepped back and fired 3 rounds into the lock. The door swung open. Inside, Serafina sat bound to a chair in the middle of an otherwise empty room. Alive. Bruised, but breathing. Her eyes found his, and something passed between them that had no words. Relief. Rage. Recognition. You came, she said. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you'd honor my sacrifice and stay safe. I'm not good at following instructions. Lucien crossed the room and cut her restraints with a knife. Serafina stood on shaking legs and collapsed against him. He caught her reflexively, one arm wrapping around her waist while the other kept his gun trained on the door. Are you hurt? He asked. Nothing permanent. You? Nothing new. She pulled back enough to look at his face. You look like hell. I've had a bad week. Despite everything, the gunfire still echoing through the house, the blood on his clothes, the danger pressing in from all sides, Serafina almost smiled. We need to move, Lucien said. Where's Damien? Not here. This is his brother's property. So this was just the holding cell. Looks like. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Boss, we got a problem. What kind? The kind with helicopters and federal badges. Someone called in a raid. We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place is swarming with agents. Lucien swore. Damien called it in. He knew we'd come. It's a trap, Serafina said. It was always a trap. He pulled her toward the door. We're leaving anyway. They moved through the house as a unit, Lucien leading, Marcus covering rear, Serafina between them. The estate had transformed into a war zone. Bodies in expensive security uniforms, bullet holes in imported wallpaper, the smell of cordite thick enough to taste. Group 1 had secured the dock. The boats waited. They were 10 feet from escape when Damien Voss stepped out of the guest house with a gun aimed at Serafina's head. Everyone froze.
Lucy Yen, Damien said pleasantly. Right on time. Let her go. Or what, you'll shoot me? Fine. But my finger's on this trigger, and Dead Man's reflex is a real thing. You shoot me, she dies too. The Mexican standoff crystallized in morning light. Lucian's team had weapons trained on Damien. Damien had his weapon trained on Serafina. Federal helicopters grew louder in the distance.
Here's how this works, Damien continued. You put down your guns, tell your people to stand down, walk away, or I paint the dock with her brain matter and deal with the consequences. You wanted me broken, Lucian said. You wanted me to suffer. Killing her defeats the purpose. Maybe I'm tired of the long game. You're bluffing. Want to test that theory? Serafina looked at Lucien and saw him calculating odds, weighing choices, trying to find the angle that saved her without surrendering everything. She'd spent a month learning from him, learning to shoot, to fight, to survive. Time to see if the lessons took. Lucien, she said quietly, don't. Trust me. Then she moved, dropped straight down like her legs had given out, removing herself from Damien's line of fire. Lucienne fired before she hit the deck. The bullet took Damien in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. His gun discharged wild. Marcus fired. 2 other team members fired. Damien went down hard, blood spreading across expensive flagstones. Not dead, but close. Lucien dragged Serafina to her feet and they ran for the boats, while behind them federal helicopters crested the tree line and orders to freeze crackled through loudspeakers. The boats roared to life. They were 50 yards offshore when the first agents hit the dock. 200 yards out when someone opened fire. Bullets stitched water around them, but the range was too far for accuracy. By the time federal boats scrambled to pursue, Lucien's team had disappeared into the maze of coastal islands where the Atlantic met Connecticut Sound. They ditched the boats an hour later, switched to vehicles staged at a private marina, drove back to Boston through morning traffic while Serafina sat in the back seat shaking from adrenaline crash, and Lucien kept one hand on her knee like he needed to confirm she was real. That was stupid, he said finally. It worked. You could have died. So could you. That's the whole point of this life, isn't it? We could all die any second, so we might as well do it for something that matters. Lucien looked at her and saw the transformation complete. The nurse who pulled him from a snowbank was gone. In her place sat someone harder, sharper, forged in the same darkness that had made him. It should have horrified him. Instead, it felt like recognition. When we get back, he said, we're ending this. Damien, his organization, everyone who helped him, I'm burning it all down. Good. It's going to be bloody. I know. People we care about might get hurt. Then we protect them better than we protected ourselves. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Boss, we got another problem. What now? Message from one of our people inside the federal system. They're issuing warrants. For you, for Serafina, for everyone on the extraction team. We just became the most wanted people in Boston. Lucien's jaw tightened. Damien's still moving pieces. Even bleeding out, he's orchestrating this. So what do we do? Serafina asked. We move faster than he does. We hit him before the warrants execute. We end this tonight. He'll be in a hospital, Marcus said, guarded, surrounded by federal agents and his own security. Good. Makes him easier to find. You want to attack a hospital? I want to finish what should have ended in that warehouse. Lucien pulled out his phone and started making calls. Get everyone we have, every resource, every favor owed. I want Damien Voss dead before midnight. The car sped through Boston's streets while behind them, the machinery of law enforcement ground into motion, and ahead of them, a crime lord lay bleeding in a hospital bed, still moving pieces on a board he thought he controlled. But Lucien Moretti had learned something in the past weeks. Sometimes the best strategy wasn't careful planning. Sometimes it was overwhelming force applied without mercy. Sometimes you just burned everything down and sorted through the ashes after. They reached the estate by noon. Lucien disappeared into his office to coordinate while Serafina went to find Vivienne. The little girl was in the library with a child services worker who'd been assigned to monitor the situation. She looked up when Serafina entered, and for one frozen moment, neither of them moved. Then Vivienne launched herself across the room. "Mama!" The word hit like it always did, part pain, part joy, all weight. Serafina caught her and held on while the child services worker watched with an expression that suggested she was filing this moment away for future reports. "You came back," Vivienne whispered. "I promised, didn't I?" "Promises break sometimes." "Not mine." They sat together on the library floor while Vivienne talked about the past 3 days. The scary people, the questions, the fear that she'd never see Serafina or her father again. The worker took notes. Serafina ignored her. "Is Papa going away again?" Vivienne asked. "Not if I can help it." "Are you going away?" "Never." "Promise?" "Promise." Another promise she had no right making but would die trying to keep anyway. The worker cleared her throat. "Miss Vale, I need to inform you that your presence here is technically in violation of several custody agreements." "Then arrest me," Serafina said without looking at her. "Otherwise leave us alone." The worker left. Vivienne curled against Serafina's side. "You're different now." "How?" "Sharper, like Papa." "Smart kid. Too smart." "Is that bad?" Serafina asked. Vivienne thought about it. "No, it means you can protect yourself." "That's good." They sat in silence while outside Lucien assembled an army. By sunset, the plan was ready. Damien was in Mass General Hospital under federal guard. 4th floor, private room. Security cameras on every corridor. At least 6 agents rotating shifts, plus Damien's own people mixed in with civilian patients and staff. Attacking it directly was suicide, so they wouldn't attack directly. "We're going to do something I've never done before," Lucien told his assembled team. "We're going to tell the truth." He pulled up a file on his laptop and transferred it to a secure server accessible by every major news outlet in Boston. "This," he said, "is 3 years of evidence documenting Damien Voss's criminal organization. Names, dates, transactions, murders, everything his lawyer brother Richard helped cover up using legal manipulation." Marcus stared at the screen. "Boss, if we release this, we expose Damien completely. His federal protection evaporates. The agents guarding him either step aside or become accomplices to known criminals. You're weaponizing the law. I'm using every tool available. Damien wanted to play with courts and custody challenges? Fine. Let's see how he likes discovery." "This burns our bridges," another team member said. "We release this, we can't operate in Boston anymore. Every cop, every fed, every judge, they'll all come for us." "Then we'll leave Boston." Lucien looked around the room. "After tonight, this city can have itself back. But first, Damien Voss dies." He hit send. The files uploaded. Within minutes, news organizations started reporting. Within an hour, the story exploded across every channel. Within 2 hours, federal agents were being pulled from Damien's hospital room to answer questions about why they were protecting a known crime lord. The board shifted. Chaos entered the game. And in that chaos, Lucien moved. They hit the hospital at 9 p.m. Not as soldiers, as patients. 12 people entering through different entrances with fabricated injuries, broken bones, chest pain, bleeding wounds that looked worse than they were. The emergency room flooded with Lucien's people, and in the confusion, 3 of them slipped past triage carrying weapons hidden in medical equipment bags. 4th floor. Damien's room. 2 federal agents still on duty despite the media firestorm. Lucien approached wearing scrubs stolen from a supply closet, a medical chart in his hands. "I need to check the patient's vitals," he said. The agents looked at him, looked at each other. "We weren't notified of any examination," one said. "Hospital administration sent me. You want to call and confirm, be my guest, But the patient's blood pressure has been unstable, and if he crashes on your watch, you'll be filling out paperwork for weeks. The magic words, bureaucracy and liability. They stepped aside. Lucien entered the room. Damien lay in the hospital bed connected to monitors, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but conscious. His eyes widened when he saw who'd walked in. "Hello, Damien," Lucien said quietly. He pulled the gun from beneath the chart. Aimed. Damien's hand moved toward the call button. "Don't," Lucien warned. "Those agents outside are the only thing between you and me. You press that button, they come in, I kill them too. Your choice." Damien's hand stilled. "You can't shoot me in a hospital," he said. "You'll never make it out." "Probably not. But you'll be dead, which is the important part." "Then do it. Shoot me. Prove you're still the ghost." Lucien's finger tightened on the trigger. 1 pound of pressure. That's all it would take. 1 bullet. End the threat. Protect Vivian. Free Serafina. Simple. But then he thought about his daughter asking if he was going away again. Thought about Serafina promising never to leave. Thought about the cost of violence and whether he wanted to pay it anymore. "No," Lucien said. He lowered the gun. Damien laughed. "You've gone soft." "Maybe, but I'm also done playing your game." Lucien pulled out his phone and showed Damien the news coverage. "Every news outlet in the state has evidence of your organization. Your protection's gone. Your empire's collapsing. And your brother, he's already cutting deals with prosecutors." The color drained from Damien's face. "Richard wouldn't. He already did. Gave up everything to avoid disbarment and prison. You're alone, Damien, completely alone." Lucien walked to the window and looked out at Boston sprawling below. "Here's what's going to happen," he continued. "You're going to federal prison, real prison, not some protected facility. And every enemy you made building your empire is going to hear that the man who went after Lucien Moretti's daughter is locked in a cage." Understanding dawned in Damien's eyes. Horror. "You're making me a target." "I'm making you pay." Lucien turned back. "You wanted me broken? Wanted me to suffer? Congratulations. I suffered. But suffering made me realize something. I don't need to kill you. I just need to make sure you spend every remaining day of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when someone I paid or someone you wronged or someone who just wants a reputation is going to shove a shank between your ribs." He walked toward the door, paused. "For what it's worth, you almost won. You took my daughter. You took Serafina. You made me choose between vengeance and the people I love. That was smart, strategic, the play I would have made." "Then why are you walking away?" Lucien smiled, cold and final as winter. "Because I learned something from a nurse who pulled me out of a snowbank and taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to live instead of choosing to kill. You should try it sometime." He left. The federal agents outside looked at him with weapons half drawn. "Relax," Lucien said. "I'm just a doctor checking on a patient." He walked past them down the corridor while behind him, Damien Voss started screaming for help that wouldn't save him from what was coming. Lucien met his team in the parking garage. "It's done," he said. "He's alive," Marcus noted. "Worse, he's going to wish he wasn't." They drove back to the estate through Boston night while news helicopters circled the hospital and federal agents swarmed a crime lord who just discovered that sometimes mercy was crueler than bullets. Ichesset. Serafina found Lucien on the mansion's terrace overlooking the Atlantic. Dawn was breaking, pink and gold across dark water. "It's over," she said. "For now." "You didn't kill him." "No." "Why not?" Lucien was quiet for a long moment, then, "Because Vivian asked me if I was going away again. And I realized I've spent my entire life choosing violence over everything else. Maybe it's time to choose differently. That's growth. That's exhaustion." Serafina leaned against the railing beside him. "So what happens now?" "Federal warrants are still active. We can't stay in Boston." "Where do we go?" "Somewhere far from here. Somewhere Vivian can grow up without armed guards and safe rooms. Somewhere—" He trailed off. "Somewhere normal?" Serafina suggested. "Is that even possible for people like us?" "Only one way to find out." They stood watching the sun rise over the city that had made them and broken them and forced them to become something new. Behind them, Vivian appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Papa? Serafina? Are you leaving? They turned. Looked at this little girl who'd survived more than any child should. Yes, Lucian said. We're leaving. All of us. Together. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. Will there be pancakes? Despite everything, the blood, the fear, the impossible weight of choices they'd made, Serafina laughed. Yes, princess, there will be pancakes. Vivian smiled and ran to them, and for the first time in their broken lives, the three of them stood together watching dawn break over a future that terrified them. But at least they'd face it as a family, whatever that meant, whatever it cost, however long it lasted, together. They had 72 hours. That's what Marcus calculated after reviewing federal warrant timelines, tracking law enforcement movements, and mapping every exit route from Boston that wouldn't end in handcuffs or worse. 72 hours to disappear before the full weight of the justice system came down on them. Lucien spent the first 12 liquidating everything he couldn't carry. The estate went to a shell corporation that would sell it quietly and transfer funds through channels so convoluted even forensic accountants would give up halfway through. Business holdings got divided among loyal people who'd earned the right to inherit pieces of an empire. Safe houses were emptied, scrubbed, abandoned. Weapons went into the harbor weighted with concrete. The ghost monarch was dismantling himself piece by piece. Serafina watched from the library window as moving trucks came and went, carrying away furniture and art, and the physical evidence of Lucien's entire life. Vivian sat beside her drawing pictures of houses that didn't look like fortresses, normal houses with gardens and neighbors, and windows that didn't need bulletproof glass. Where do you want to go? Serafina asked her. Vivian thought about it seriously. Somewhere warm, with beaches, and no basements. Why no basements? Because that's where people hide when bad things happen. I don't want to hide anymore. The wisdom in that statement hit harder than it should. Serafina pulled the little girl closer. No more hiding, I promise. Will Papa be different when we leave? What do you mean? Less scary, more like when he makes pancakes. Serafina looked at Vivian's hopeful face and wanted to promise yes. Wanted to say that leaving Boston would erase decades of violence and transform Lucien into something softer. But she'd learned to stop lying to this kid. I think, she said carefully, that your papa will always have sharp edges. But maybe in a new place he won't need to use them as much. That's a grown-up answer. You asked a grown-up question. Vivienne returned to her drawing, adding a swing set to her imaginary normal house. The door opened and Lucien entered carrying a file folder. He looked exhausted. 3 days of dismantling an empire while dodging federal attention had carved new lines into his face. We have a problem, he said. Of course they did. What kind? Serafina asked. The kind where Catherine Wells, the lawyer who delivered the custody challenge, just requested a meeting. Says she has information we need before we run. It's a trap. Probably, but she's coming alone, unarmed, says she'll meet in public. Why would she help us? That's what I want to find out. Eads. They met her at a coffee shop in Cambridge. Neutral territory far enough from Boston proper that federal surveillance was thin, but public enough that violence would draw immediate attention. Catherine sat at a corner table wearing civilian clothes instead of her usual power suit, looking smaller somehow. Human instead of predatory. Lucien slid into the seat across from her while Marcus and 2 others watched from strategic positions around the cafe. Serafina stayed back with Vivian at the estate. No reason to risk the child in whatever game Catherine was playing. Thank you for coming, Catherine said. You have 5 minutes. I'll need less. She pushed a manila envelope across the table. This is everything I have on Damien Voss's organization. Financial records, communications, evidence of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and about 40 other charges. Lucien didn't touch the envelope. Why? Because I'm a lawyer, not a monster. What Damien had me do, using a dead woman's estate to steal a child, I can rationalize a lot of moral flexibility, but that crossed lines I didn't know I had. You could have said no. I could have. I didn't. That's on me. Catherine's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. But I can help fix it. Those documents prove the custody challenge was fraudulent. They prove Richard Voss committed perjury.
They give you leverage if federal prosecutors try to use Vivian against you. Prosecutors don't negotiate with people under warrant. They do if you give them bigger fish. Damien's organization is bigger than yours ever was, Lucian. Wider reach, more federal interest. You offer them that wrapped in a bow, they might consider immunity for testimony. Might? Better odds than running. Lucien studied her face, looking for the angle, the trap, the inevitable betrayal. Found only guilt and something that looked like genuine regret. "What do you want in exchange?" he asked. "Nothing. Nobody does something for nothing. Then consider it penance." Catherine stood. "I helped rip a little girl from her home. I can't undo that, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again." She left the envelope and walked out. Lucien sat alone at the table, weighing options that all tasted like poison in different flavors. He could run, take Serafina and Vivian, and disappear into whatever new life he could build from ashes. Or he could fight. Use Catherine's evidence to burn down what remained of Damien's empire and trade cooperation for freedom. Running meant safety, but also meant looking over his shoulder forever. Fighting meant risk, but also meant ending this completely. He opened the envelope and started reading. By the time he finished, he knew what he had to do. Deck. The federal prosecutor's office overlooked Boston Harbor from the 23rd floor of a building that existed to remind criminals how small they were. Lucien walked in wearing a suit instead of tactical gear, hands empty instead of armed, and sat across from Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Morrison like they were colleagues instead of enemies. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "this is unexpected. I have a deal for you. We don't negotiate with fugitives. You do when they're offering to hand you the biggest organized crime prosecution in New England history." He slid Catherine's envelope across the desk. "Everything you need to dismantle Damien Voss's entire organization. Financial crimes, RICO predicates. Enough evidence to put him and 15 of his top people away for decades." Morrison opened the envelope and started reading. Her expression didn't change, but Lucien saw the moment she realized what she was holding. "This is comprehensive," she admitted. "It's a gift. In exchange, I want immunity for myself, Serafina Vale, and everyone involved in the Connecticut extraction. Full immunity, sealed records, and the federal warrants dropped." "That's a lot to ask." "I'm offering a lot." Morrison closed the envelope and leaned back in her chair, studying him with the kind of calculated assessment that meant she was running scenarios, weighing political capital, measuring career advancement against principle. "Why now?" she asked. "You've been operating in Boston for 2 decades. You could have cooperated at any point. Why wait until you're facing warrants?" "Because I have a daughter who deserves better than growing up visiting her father in prison. Because I'm tired. Because continuing this life costs more than I'm willing to pay anymore." That's surprisingly honest. "I'm surprisingly tired of lying." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then, "I'll take this to my superiors. But I need more than documents. I need testimony, depositions. You on a witness stand if this goes to trial. Against Damien? Against everyone in that envelope." Lucien thought about Vivian drawing houses with swing sets. About Serafina learning to shoot because his world demanded violence from everyone it touched. About the ghost monarch he'd been and the man he was trying to become. "Okay," he said. "I'll testify. Then we have a deal, pending approval from the U.S. attorney." She extended her hand. Lucien shook it and felt the weight of an empire slide off his shoulders. The approval came through in 48 hours. Full immunity in exchange for cooperation. Warrants withdrawn. Federal protection during the prosecution phase. Lucien read the agreement 3 times, looking for traps and loopholes. Found only standard legal language and the signature of someone powerful enough to make promises stick. He called Marcus. "It's done. We're clear." "The team?" "Everyone. Full immunity as long as they don't commit new crimes." "What about Damien?" "He's the government's problem now." Marcus was quiet. "Boss, you know what happens to crime lords who cooperate with feds." "I know. You'll be a target for everyone who thinks you broke the code, for everyone who sees cooperation as weakness. Then I'll be a target somewhere far from here where nobody knows my face." "You really think you can just walk away?" Lucien looked around the estate that had been his throne and his prison.
I don't know, but I'm going to try. Bassam. They left Boston on a Tuesday morning when the city was gray and cold and looked exactly like it had the night Serafina pulled him from the snow, full circle, ending where they'd begun. 3 people in a car heading south with everything they owned in bags that fit in the trunk. No motorcade, no security detail, no empire following behind them, just a family running towards something instead of away from it. Vivian sat in the back seat watching Boston disappear through the window.
Will we ever come back? Do you want to? Lucien asked. She thought about it. No, this city has too many ghosts. Where did you learn to talk like that? Serafina's books. Serafina smiled from the passenger seat. I'm a terrible influence. The best ones usually are.
They drove through New England watching winter loosen its grip on the landscape, ice giving way to mud, snow melting into streams, the world transforming slowly from frozen to fluid. By nightfall, they crossed into New York. By midnight, they'd reached Philadelphia. By dawn, they were in Virginia, and Lucien realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd driven this far without someone trying to kill him. It felt like freedom, fragile and uncertain, and probably temporary, but freedom nonetheless. They stopped in a small coastal town in North Carolina where nobody knew them and nobody cared. Rented a house 3 blocks from the beach. Nothing like the mansion, everything like the life Vivian had drawn in her pictures. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like salt air instead of gun oil, windows that opened without security overrides. Normal, aggressively, impossibly normal. Serafina stood in the kitchen unpacking boxes while Lucien assembled furniture with the kind of focused intensity he used to apply to dismantling enemies. Vivian explored her new room, small and bright, and hers in a way the mansion bedroom never was. This feels wrong, Lucien said, struggling with an instruction manual for a bookshelf. What does? Being this ordinary, making pancakes and building furniture and pretending the past 20 years didn't happen. We're not pretending they didn't happen. We're deciding they don't define what happens next. That's optimistic. That's survival. He looked at her, really looked, and saw someone transformed by the same darkness that had made him, but shaped differently by it. Where violence had hardened him into steel, it had honed her into something sharper and more precise, a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. I never thanked you, he said. For what? For not running that night in the snow. For staying when any sane person would have left. For becoming exactly what Vivian and I needed, even though it cost you everything. It didn't cost me everything. It cost me who I was. But I'm not sure I liked her much anyway. The nurse who saved lives? The nurse who was so busy saving strangers, she forgot how to save herself. Serafina set down the box she'd been unpacking. You and Vivian taught me that sometimes survival means accepting help, accepting family, accepting that you don't have to carry everything alone. We're not much of a family. We're exactly enough of one. Vivian appeared in the doorway. The ocean's loud here. I can hear it through my window. Does that bother you? Serafina asked. No, it sounds like breathing, like the house is alive. She ran back to her room. Lucien and Serafina stood in the kitchen listening to waves crash against the shore and a little girl laugh without fear for the first time in her short life. We're going to fuck this up, Lucien said quietly. I don't know how to be a normal father. You don't know how to be a normal anything anymore. We're both too damaged. Probably, but at least we'll fuck it up together. That's romantic. That's realistic. He smiled despite himself. Outside, seabirds screamed. Inside, they started building something that looked like a future. The first month was harder than any of them expected. Lucien couldn't sleep without checking window locks 3 times. Couldn't walk down streets without mapping escape routes. Couldn't look at strangers without calculating threat levels. 20 years of survival instinct didn't shut off just because the danger changed zip codes. Serafina caught him one night standing at the living room window at 3 a.m., gun in hand, watching shadows that weren't threats. What are you doing? She asked. Keeping watch. Against what? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. She took the gun from his hand and set it on the table. You have to let go. I don't know how. Then learn. We both do. She was right. They were both broken in ways that didn't heal quickly or completely. Serafina woke from nightmares about Vivian screaming while federal agents dragged her away, jumped at loud noises, checked her phone compulsively for news about Damien's prosecution, like watching it from afar could protect her from it. Trauma was a patient teacher. It didn't care that they'd escaped. It followed them south and made itself at home in their new normal life. But slowly, painfully, incrementally, slowly, they started healing. Lucien got a job at a local bakery. The owner didn't ask questions about his past, just handed him an apron and taught him to make bread with hands built for violence. Kneading dough became meditation. Watching yeast transform flour and water into something alive became proof that destruction wasn't the only thing he was good at. Serafina found work at a small community clinic. Nothing like the Boston Free Clinic. This one actually had supplies and funding and enough staff that nobody worked 16-hour shifts. She treated fishermen with infected cuts and retirees with high blood pressure and kids with strep throat, and remembered why she'd become a nurse in the first place. To help. Not to save the world, just to help the person in front of her. Vivian enrolled in first grade at a public school where nobody knew her father was a crime lord and nobody cared that she'd grown up in a mansion. She made friends, learned to read chapter books, came home with art projects and scraped knees and stories about playground politics that were infinitely less lethal than the politics she'd grown up around. She started calling Serafina Mama without hesitation, started calling Lucien Papa without fear, started being a kid. 6 months in, they celebrated Vivian's 7th birthday on the beach with a cake Lucien baked himself and presents wrapped in newspaper because they'd forgotten to buy wrapping paper. It was small and imperfect, and absolutely nothing like the elaborate parties Lucien used to throw in the Boston mansion where hired entertainers performed for children who were too scared of their parents to enjoy themselves. This was better. Vivian blew out candles and made a wish, and when Serafina asked what she'd wished for, the little girl said, "That we stay here forever." "I thought you weren't supposed to tell, or it won't come true," Lucien said. "Some wishes are better when you say them out loud." A year after leaving Boston, Lucien got the call he'd been expecting. Assistant U.S. Attorney Morrison. Professional. Courteous. The voice of a system that had made him promises. "Mr. Moretti, the Voss case is going to trial next month. We'll need you in Boston for testimony." Lucien's hand tightened on the phone. "How long?" "A week, maybe 2 depending on cross-examination. We've arranged security and accommodation." "What about my family?" "They can come if you want, or we can provide protection for them in North Carolina." He thought about Vivian finally sleeping through the night without nightmares, about Serafina laughing at dinner, about the life they'd built from wreckage. "They'll stay here," he said. "I'll come alone." "Understood. We'll send details." She hung up. Lucien stood in the kitchen of his small rental house and felt the past reaching for him with skeletal fingers. Serafina found him there an hour later, still holding the phone. "What happened?" she asked. "Trial's starting. They need me to testify." "When?" 3 weeks. She sat down at the kitchen table and he saw her running calculations, threat assessments, risk analyses, all the things they'd learned together in darkness. "It'll be dangerous," she said. "Yes." "Damien's people will try to stop you." "Probably." "You could refuse, break the deal, disappear deeper." "I could, but then we'd always be running, always looking over our shoulders. This ends it completely." "Or gets you killed." "That too." Vivian appeared in the doorway. "Papa, are you leaving?" The fear in her voice cut deeper than any bullet. Lucien knelt down to her eye level. "Just for a little while. I have to go back to Boston to help put some bad people in prison, but I'm coming back. I promise." "You promised before." "And I kept it, didn't I?" She nodded reluctantly. "This is the same. I go, I testify, I come home, and then we never have to think about Boston again. What if something bad happens? Then Serafina will keep you safe until I get back." Vivian looked at Serafina, who nodded seriously. "Okay," Vivian whispered, "but you have to call every night." "Every night, before bed." She hugged him and ran back to her room. Lucien stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement in a way that reminded him he wasn't young anymore. "I don't want to go," he admitted. "But you will anyway,"
Serafina said, because it's the right thing. Since when do you care about the right thing? Since I met a nurse who pulled me out of the snow and taught me that some debts are worth paying.
Boston looked different through the window of a federal courthouse. Smaller, somehow. Less threatening. Just a city full of people trying to survive like everywhere else. Lucy, Ian sat in a witness preparation room with Morrison and two other prosecutors going through testimony for the fifth time. They'd been at it for 3 days, rehearsing questions, anticipating defense strategies, making sure his answers were precise enough to convict, but general enough not to incriminate himself in areas outside the immunity agreement. "You're ready," Morrison said finally. "I was ready 2 days ago. Defense is going to come at you hard. They'll try to discredit you as a criminal cooperating to save himself. They'll bring up your history. They'll make you look like the villain. I am the villain. Not in this courtroom. In here, you're the witness putting away someone worse." Lucian looked at her and saw the rationalization lawyers made to sleep at night. The moral flexibility that let them use monsters to catch bigger monsters. He'd done worse for worse reasons. "When do I testify?" he asked. "Tomorrow. 9 a.m. The prosecution will examine you first. Then defense gets their turn. Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information." "I know how this works." "Do you? Because the last time you were in a courtroom, you were the defendant." "Fair point." That night, Lucian called home. Vivienne answered on the second ring. "Papa! Hey, princess, how was school?" "Good. I got an A on my spelling test. And Tommy shared his cookies at lunch. And we're reading a book about a pig who can talk." Normal kid things. Beautiful, mundane, ordinary things. "That's wonderful," Lucian said, his throat tight. "When are you coming home?" "Soon. Maybe a week." "That's forever." "I know, but I call every night, right?" "Every night," she confirmed. "Serafina wants to talk to you." The phone rustled, then Serafina's voice. "How's it going?" "As expected. I testify tomorrow." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." "That's what I used to tell my people before operations." "Then you trained me well." They sat in comfortable silence connected by phone lines across 500 miles. "I miss you," Lucian said finally. "I miss you too. But you're doing the right thing." "The right thing might get me killed." "Then don't die." "I'd be annoyed." Despite everything, he laughed. "I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask." They said goodnight. Lucian lay in the federal safehouse bed, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, and thought about all the choices that had led him here. All the violence, all the blood, all the years spent building an empire he'd traded for immunity and a chance at something resembling redemption. Worth it. All of it. If it meant Vivienne got to be a normal kid and Serafina got to save lives instead of digging bullets from crime lords. He fell asleep thinking about pancakes and beaches and 7-year-olds who wished out loud. The courtroom was packed. Media, federal agents, Damien's remaining associates watching from the gallery with expressions that promised violence if they got the chance. Lucian walked to the witness stand wearing a suit that felt like a costume, raised his right hand, swore an oath he half believed, and sat down facing the man who'd tried to destroy him. Damien Voss looked smaller in prison jumpsuit orange, diminished, human instead of monstrous. Their eyes met, and Lucian saw hatred there, pure and distilled and absolutely mutual. The prosecution began. Morrison walked him through his history with Damien, their partnership, the gradual deterioration, the ambush that left Lucien with 16 bullets, the custody challenge, the kidnapping. Lucien answered every question with careful precision. Yes, Damien Voss ordered the attack. Yes, the custody challenge was fraudulent. Yes, Damien had orchestrated Serafina's kidnapping as leverage. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination, a sharp woman in an expensive suit who looked at Lucien like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Mr. Moretti," she began, "you're testifying in exchange for immunity, correct?" "Yes." "Immunity for crimes including racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder?" "Yes." "So you're a criminal being rewarded for testifying against another criminal." "That's one way to look at it. Is there another way?" I'm someone who made terrible choices for 20 years, finally choosing to do something right. How noble. Tell me, Mr. Moretti, how many people have you killed? Morrison objected. Relevance, Your Honor. I'm establishing the witness's credibility, the defense attorney said. The judge allowed it. Lucien looked at the jury and made a choice. I don't know, he said honestly. I stopped counting after the first dozen. Does that make me a monster? Yes. Does that mean I'm lying now? No. I'm here because I'm tired of being a monster, and I want my daughter to grow up knowing her father tried to be better. The courtroom went silent. The defense attorney tried a different angle. You had a relationship with Serafina Vale, correct? Yes. And she was involved in the illegal extraction from the Connecticut property? She was a victim I rescued, or an accomplice who helped you evade federal custody. She's a nurse who saved my life and became collateral damage in a war she never asked to be part of. Yet here you are, testifying to save yourself while she's not even in this courtroom. She's in North Carolina being the mother my daughter deserves, and I'm here making sure the man who tried to take both of them from me pays for it. The cross-examination continued for 2 hours. The defense tried to break him, discredit him, make him look like a liar trading testimony for freedom. But Lucien had spent decades lying professionally. He knew how to sell truth when he had to. Finally, it ended. The judge dismissed him. Lucien walked out of the courtroom past Damien Voss one last time. This doesn't end here, Damien said quietly. Yes, it does, Lucien replied. You're going to prison. I'm going home. We're both getting exactly what we deserve. He left the courthouse, got into the federal vehicle waiting outside, disappeared back into protective custody while the trial continued without him. 3 days later, Morrison called with the verdict. Guilty. All counts. Damien Voss sentenced to 45 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. It's over, Morrison said. Lucien closed his eyes and let the weight of 2 decades lift. Thank you. Don't thank me. Stay clean. Honor the immunity agreement, and don't come back to Boston. I won't. She hung up. Lucien booked a flight home. Oh shit. Serafina and Vivienne met him at the airport. The little girl ran through the terminal and launched herself into his arms with enough force to make his still-healing ribs protest. You came back, she shouted. I promised, didn't I? Promises kept are better than promises made. Where did you learn that? Serafina's books again. He looked over Vivienne's head at the woman who'd saved him in more ways than one. She stood watching them with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. It's done, he said. I know. I saw the news. 45 years. Long enough. More than. They drove home through North Carolina, summer heat, while Vivienne chattered about everything he'd missed, school projects and beach trips, and the hermit crab she'd named Gerald, who lived in a tank in her room. Normal things, beautiful things, the things worth surviving for. 5 years later, the world looked entirely different. On the Amalfi Coast, tucked between sea cliffs and narrow stone streets, stood a small bakery called Velvet Jasmine. The name had been Serafina's idea, combining the street where Lucien had nearly died with the tea she'd made him while he healed, a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. Every morning, Lucien woke before dawn to make bread. His hands, scarred from violence, marked by choices he couldn't undo, shaped dough with the same precision he'd once used for darker purposes. The bakery smelled like yeast and salt air and possibility. Serafina worked part-time at a local clinic where patients paid her in flowers and homemade wine and stories about their grandchildren. She'd learned Italian through immersion and stubbornness, laughing through mistakes until the language felt natural. Vivienne, now 12 and fierce and brilliant, played piano in the courtyard every afternoon. Tourists stopped to listen. Locals brought their children to watch. She performed like she'd been born for it, fingers dancing across keys, creating beauty from discipline and practice and joy. The ghost monarch of Boston no longer existed. Only a husband, a father, a man finally learning how to live. One golden afternoon, Serafina leaned against the bakery counter watching the ocean shimmer beneath the Italian sun. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The power? Lucien looked toward Vivienne laughing outside beneath strings of lights. Then at Serafina, who'd taught him that strength came in forms he'd never considered. "No," he said honestly. "I finally found something stronger." "What's that?" "This, you, her, the chance to be ordinary." Serafina smiled and kissed him, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, marking the hour and reminding them that time kept moving forward whether they were ready or not. But they were ready. After everything. After the blood and the fear and the impossible choices. After learning that sometimes survival meant letting go of who you were to become who you needed to be. They were ready. That night, they sat together on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean while Vivian practiced Bach upstairs and the smell of baking bread drifted through open windows. "I never thanked you properly," Lucian said. "For what?" "For not leaving me in that snowbank, for seeing something worth saving even when I couldn't." "You saved yourself. I just kept you breathing long enough to figure that out." "Semantics." "Truth." He pulled her closer, this woman who'd become his anchor and his conscience and his future all at once. "I love you," he said. Simple words he'd spent 40 years learning how to mean. "I know," Serafina replied. "You tell me every morning when you make coffee." "How?" "The way you remember I take it black. The way you warm the cup first. The way you hand it to me like you're offering something precious." "That's not saying I love you." "That's exactly saying it. You just speak a different language." She was right. He'd spent his life speaking in violence and silence and the spaces between words where meaning hid from the light. But she'd learned to translate, learned to hear the declarations in mundane gestures, learned to love a monster as he transformed into something almost human. Vivian appeared on the terrace. "I finished practicing. Can we walk to the beach?" "It's late," Serafina said. "Please?" "Just to the water?" They looked at each other and nodded. The three of them walked down narrow streets where laundry hung between buildings, and cats watched from stone walls and the Mediterranean breathed against the shore in rhythms older than empires. At the beach, Vivian ran ahead chasing waves while Lucien and Serafina followed more slowly, hands linked, watching the girl who'd survived impossible circumstances become exactly who she was meant to be. "We did okay," Serafina said quietly. "We did better than okay. She's happy. She's alive and healthy and happy. That's everything." They stood at the water's edge while night settled over the coast and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Vivian collected shells, waves erased footprints. The world kept spinning. And for the first time in their broken lives, that was enough, more than enough. Everything they'd fought for and bled for and nearly died for crystallized into this single perfect moment where the past didn't matter and the future could wait. They were home. Not in Boston, where violence had defined them, not in North Carolina, where they'd learned to heal, but here, in a small coastal town where nobody knew their names and nobody cared what they'd been, where a former crime lord baked bread, where a nurse saved lives in ways that didn't require bullets, where a little girl played piano and collected shells and dreamed ordinary dreams, where three broken people had built something whole from the wreckage of who they used to be. Vivian ran back to them, holding a perfect spiral shell. "Look what I found." Serafina examined it seriously. "That's beautiful." "Can I keep it?" "Of course." "I'm going to put it on my windowsill, so every morning I remember today." "Why this day specifically?" Lucien asked. Vivian looked at both of them. These imperfect adults who'd fought monsters and survived impossible circumstances and given her the one thing every child needed, a family. However unconventional, however hard-won, however imperfect. "Because today was perfect," she said simply, "and I want to remember perfect." She ran ahead again. Lucien and Serafina followed. The ocean whispered against the shore. The stars multiplied overhead. And somewhere in the darkness, the ghosts of who they'd been faded into memory. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. But finally, mercifully, left behind. They walked home through Italian twilight while Vivienne sang off-key and kicked sand and embodied every ordinary, extraordinary moment they'd fought to give her. Tomorrow, Lucien would wake before dawn and make bread. Serafina would treat patients at the clinic. Vivienne would go to school and practice piano and complain about homework. Ordinary. Gloriously, impossibly ordinary.
the life they'd earned through blood and sacrifice and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. And when they finally reached the bakery and climbed the stairs to their small apartment above it and tucked Vivian into bed with her perfect shell on the windowsill, Lucien stood in the doorway watching his daughter sleep. Serafina joined him. "No regrets?" she whispered.
About leaving Boston? About testifying? About walking away from everything I built? Yes. Lucien thought about the ghost monarch he'd been, the empire he'd commanded, the fear he'd inspired and the respect he'd demanded and the power he'd wielded like a weapon. Then he thought about this. A bakery, a clinic, a little girl who called him Papa without fear, a woman who'd seen the worst of him and chosen to stay anyway. "No regrets," he said. "Not a single one." They closed Vivian's door and walked to their bedroom where windows overlooked the Mediterranean and the smell of jasmine drifted on night air and the world felt safe enough to sleep in. Lucien pulled Serafina close. She rested her head against his chest where 16 bullet scars marked the places she'd saved him first. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For dragging me out of the snow. For refusing to let me die. For teaching me that monsters can learn to be human if someone loves them hard enough. You were always human, you just forgot for a while. And you remembered for me. Someone had to." They fell asleep to the sound of waves and each other's breathing. Two people who'd found each other in darkness and built a life in light. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and hard-won, and absolutely theirs. And when morning came and Lucien woke to make bread, and Serafina made coffee, and Vivian stumbled sleepy-eyed to breakfast, they did it all again. The beautiful ordinary rhythm of survival, the quiet victory of waking up safe, the profound gift of a second chance neither of them deserved, but both had earned through sheer stubborn refusal to let the past define the future. Boston was a lifetime away. The ghost was dead. And Lucien Moretti, baker, father, husband, survivor, was finally, impossibly, free.